Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be. For all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth, welcome to Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, coming to you live from the deep woods of western Georgia on this May 28th, 2024. Tonight, the subject matter is theology, and we are going to be covering some major misconceptions that people have about Christian theology. We'll be covering things from a different perspective a bit, so it will be new to everyone, even if you think you're familiar with Christian theology. Remember, the Nicolaitan Catholic Church is an esoteric Catholic church. We go a little bit further, a little bit deeper than most people, and on this show, we go as deep as you want to go. So don't miss this one. It's going to be a fantastic educational night. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode of Vestiges After Dark. Once again, I'm your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, here with my co-host, Jamie Wolf. How are you doing tonight, Jamie?
Hey, everybody. Good to see y'all in the chat.
Wonderful, wonderful subject matter tonight, theology. One of our preferred topics, I think, on this show, and certainly we are going to go fairly down,
You're going to burst some bubbles is what you're going to do.
We're going to go down the rabbit hole pretty far, I think. Yeah, and we'll have time for your questions too. And remember, we have a new number. We're not doing the old switchboard. That wasn't working out, but our new number works fine. I think I've got this configured correctly, so we won't have any weird interruptions. You'll be able to call into the show, and we'll take you on when we're ready. I'll put that number up on the screen, and I'll announce it when it is time to call into the show. But right now, we're going to start off here tonight with liturgical libations, and this is one of my favorites. It's a little bit of a leftover from Christmas. I drink a lot of cognac during the Christmas season, and Hein is a favorite. It's a wonderful champagne cognac, and that's perfect. That is perfect. I always have scotch after the show, so I just need a little bit right now.
Pretty sure I've had this with you.
Oh yes, I've served you Hein many times actually. But it's a wonderful French cognac. A wonderful gift from France.
Yeah, they do a few things pretty damn well.
They do quite a few things. When it comes to the culinary arts,
food and drink, they've got that down.
Yeah, they do. I don't think
I love good cognac.
Anybody understands food and alcohol like the French do. They really don't. There's something just about.
Make that last.
Yeah, make it. Well, you don't have to. There's still some over there, and I do have a wonderful XO upstairs that I can replace this one with. So, I also have in that case, I have an almanac that I purchased from my birthday year, 1973, that I'm going to open on my birthday. So, maybe we'll serve that at one of the summer specials. How about that? It should be a good one.
You can find a 72 for me.
Yeah, I'll have to dig one. Well, I think they did. I think they had a 72 as well. So maybe we can go back there and get that one, and we can see how they compare. Want to do it?
Yeah. Let's try it.
All right, let's do it. Next time we'll go down to Total, pick it up. Okay. We have Father Chris all the way over there in the future. We call that Australia over here. How you doing tonight, Father?
I'm doing well. Armagnac is one of my favorites. I think I prefer it to cognac.
Well,
Really. I mean, that's a silly thing to say, really. That's all good, but
they're all good.
There's very good cognac, of course.
Well,
but,
I got a 73 Armagnac that I might hold for. I might save you a little bit when you come out.
Just a
that
splash.
sounds great. That sounds really good. Yeah. So no, things are going well here. We're into winter, of course. So actually, this is the best for me in Australia because it's nice and cool, but it's still sunny and
not too bad.
Of course, we still have a daughter living at home with us. That's why I'm in a t-shirt, because the heating is so full on that it feels like I'm in Georgia right now.
Oh, you don't want to be here right now.
Actually, it's been too bad.
It's been stifling, humid outside in the morning.
Well, humid, but it's only been about 80 degrees. It's not been 80
Just
Fahrenheit.
been
It's not too bad.
It's been soupy.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to blasting some theology at people and dealing with some misconceptions. And also, I've been entertained by the various things going on with the Pope in the last week.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
I have not.
Deeply amusing.
I guess I need to get caught up.
Oh, you haven't? He accidentally used a slur, an Italian slur for gay people.
Which translates into, I won't say the word, don't worry, but it translates into English as the pejorative for gay men beginning with F.
You probably can figure it out. Yeah, and
or a
so
British cigarette, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
I've got a great explanation as to why he would do that.
I think
we might get to it.
Well, let's get to it. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that coming up, because I guess that is also a bit of a theological misconception. It was basically in a closed door meeting, so someone had to have leaked it, I think.
Which I don't like that. I don't like that someone leaked it.
Well, it means that there's subversion going on in the church. Oh, well, isn't that like news, right?
Shocker!
My faith is rocked.
Oh my goodness! It's days like this where I just love being in the ISM. All right, we've got. I'm telling you, we got Brandon Milam all the way over in Tennessee, not too far away, but he's here with us tonight. How you doing tonight, Brandon?
I'm doing pretty good. This episode, I've been waiting all season for it, so let's get it done.
Well, this is really your episode. I mean, this is your design. The questions that we are going to be handling are things that really, I think, from your personal experience, honestly. So this should be interesting from your point of view, as well as from those that were taught a very similar type of Christianity. Because, I mean, I'm sure it feels a bit isolating at times, but you're not alone in having been raised with the kinds of things that you've been taught over the years that you've talked about on this show or on the network. So, I've seen it. I've seen crazy stuff. It's pretty bad in Florida, too. With the same kind of thinking. So, I mean, we're going to try to clear up a lot of this tonight, and I'm appreciative of all of the subjects that you brought to tonight's show. So we've got about 16, I think, if I counted correctly, about 16 different points. We might not get to them all. We're not trying to get through them all. It's not like we're on a time crunch or anything. We're just going to we're going to list them off. Brandon will list them off, and then we're going to talk about them as long as they need to be talked about. And once we're satisfied that we've arrived at the answer,
3 or 4 if we need to.
If we have to, we'll do more. I mean, that's what the next season is for, right? Okay, so we'll be dealing with that here. But let's start off this hour with questions from the ether, Brandon. So go ahead and get started with that one.
So the first question, out of all the ancient cultures who understood the existence of ghosts, would you say the Sumerians had the closest understanding with the Gaidam? From my research, they believed the Gaidam were imprints of the deceased person.
Yeah, I think it's pronounced Gedim. I could be wrong on that, but it is. I think an important thing to understand that, and remarkably so, that most of the world's cultures were very much on the same page when it came to the nature of the afterlife and ghosts. They had different perspectives on how you get to certain places, or how you can win the favor of certain gods to have perhaps more of a favorable afterlife situation. But overall, regardless of where you are in the world, there is sort of a universal understanding that the ancients had about certain things. So I wouldn't say that the Sumerians understood it the closest, because I think everybody in that same time period really pretty much had a generalized understanding of this that would have been recognizable to everybody else. And I think the reason for that is a very simple one. Of course, this is my own contention. I can't prove this scientifically, but I think it is a reasonable contention to hold, is that the ancients weren't sanitized from the death experience like we are today. They lived with it as intimately as every other aspect of life. We in the snowflakes of the first world here in Western society can't deal with death. We're afraid of it. We're ashamed of it. We're uncomfortable with it. So we sweep it under the carpet for as long as we can. And then when we're forced to deal with it, when somebody dies, we even sanitize that with embalming and the makeup and the $30,000 coffin so that you can last a little bit longer in the ground. This kind of nonsense that we do, and even the laws themselves, how you can't even die peacefully in your home and be left alone there for a few days so that you have a chance for the family to integrate with the dead person. Everything has to be, sanitized. And this has created, I think, a culture that is uncomfortably obsessed with death, but has zero understanding as to how to work with it. And I think the reason that they have so many different viewpoints now is that people are now operating from the basis of wishful thinking. So it's much easier to be like, grandma's in a better place, grandma's an angel, grandma's, maybe she runs heaven now. I don't know. Maybe she just replaced God. That's probably the next step, right? I mean, because that's not going to be good enough to just be an angel. You have to be God next. So that's just the way the culture's going. So, we have to create these fantasies in order to feel more comfortable with death. When in reality, the ancients did not have this type of hang up, and it was all around you. And I mean, that's why people would have 18, 20 kids, because you knew you're going to lose a few of them.
Some of them ain't going to make it.
Most of them are not going to make it. Well, not most of them, but some of them are not going to make it to adulthood. And so, you had a lot so that you prepared for that contingency. You dealt with death. Even when people get uncomfortable with those Victorian black and whites where they would pose dead bodies with the living, to make it look like they were still alive. We would never, people would be disgusted by that today. It would be considered almost like a horror film.
The 1900s, early, homes were built with that front room.
Yes.
I forget what they called it, but that was where you had the funerals.
That's why we call it a living room.
Yeah.
That's exactly why. And the parlor.
Yeah, my house.
Funeral parlor.
Grew up in 120. It was built in like 1902 or something.
Right.
Its front room.
Yes.
That's what that's for.
Yeah. That's where we get those words.
In Australia, they call it the good room.
The good room? That's very good. So I would say that when you actually start looking at what the ancient Japanese believed, the Sumerians, the Jews, the pagans from Europe, there was a very common understanding. Look at Hades and Sheol.
Yeah.
There's not much of a difference between those two. There really isn't. I mean, not at all. And they both translate perfectly to the word hell. We've talked a lot about that on the show. We'll probably talk about it some tonight. I'm sure it'll come up. But this is, again, a reflection of the fact that you didn't have the distractions of social media. You didn't have these crazy mass media companies, pushing politics and identity politics and all of the stuff that people are obsessed with today. And ultimately, you didn't live a comfortable life. And you didn't live necessarily a long one. Right. So death was more imminent. It was more tangible. It was more inevitable. And I think people today when you're young, when you're in your young 20s, late teens, you don't even think, old age feels like it's something that's like in another universe away, you know, and it's not that far away. You know, 50 years is not really a very long time when you actually live them. It seems like a long time when you haven't lived 50 years, but once you've lived 50 years, it's like, boy, that wasn't that long. And because it's not that long. You know, so when you consider the lifespan of a person, you know, 75, 85 years, somewhere in there, you know, it's not a long time, but when you were living to 45, 55, which a lot of, you know, that was more realistic to die at that age, that kind, you know, that wouldn't have been considered abnormal like it is today.
Totally back then.
Yeah. You know, I mean, you were more prepared for death. So you were more in tune with death, and you were more in tune with your spirituality. So the ancients were more connected with these processes that we have largely forgotten through the course of becoming very materialistic and superficial is really what it comes down to.
And actually immature. Really.
Yeah, spiritually immature and emotionally immature, which I say was probably two sides of the same coin. You want to add anything to this one, Father? I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the commonalities across culture are part of the proof of the existence of God, because there is only one God. And he is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And therefore, all people are responding to that one God with the revelation that they have. And so it shouldn't surprise us at all that Hebrew and Greek notions of the afterlife have things in common. And as you say on the show, concepts of Buddhist thinking as well. So so that's one of the proofs of the existence of God is the absolute commonality of transculturally and without any abeyance to geography, these concepts coming up and recurring through time.
Yes.
And in our own time, I think Marx was sort of right about one thing, and that is that the economic situation of a culture does influence how people think and act. And that's why in the West we've largely become very comfortable, even if that's not everybody's lives have challenges. Everybody has existential crises. Everybody has discouragement. So I'm not taking any of that away from anybody in the world. But in the West, our parameters or our tolerance for discomfort have shrunk right in. So we still feel it just as intensely as somebody, who is a street urchin in Delhi in India. We psychologically we feel it just as big, but actually our parameters are much narrower as to what we can tolerate.
Sure.
And it's partly because our societies are now, particularly here, we're in a situation where people can't leave home at 18 and buy a house.
Right.
You can't. It's impossible.
Right.
And so it doesn't do for people to, and I've been one of them. People, perpetual adolescents, they don't leave home till they're 40. Well, actually they can't. And so, there is, and that's the political angle, right? But we're not about that on this show necessarily, but I only mention it because it does feed into our spiritual approach to life. And on the last show, I said, that Celtic cultures were far better at dealing with death.
Oh yeah.
I actually think, sadly, I think that's on the wane. I think the sort of equal and opposite response to Catholicism that's going on in Ireland and the parts of Britain are sort of putting pay to that. But it wasn't unusual in my tradition. Like when a loved one died, we certainly would all go and see the body.
Yes.
And oftentimes there'd be open caskets and wakes where they're at the wake. That still does go on in Ireland and parts of Northern England. So, and I think, being confronted with death, my challenge to our current society is that we've got to, or to the church or to spiritual people within our culture, is we've got to move away from this idea that death is this, let's not talk about it, it's just kind of a failure, to re-embracing the good spiritual disciplines and lessons that come from confronting death.
Well said.
Both for those our loved ones who are dying, who actually shouldn't be, Yeah, or he lost his battle with cancer. What, you want to die a loser? No.
I know. I hate that terminology.
Let's embrace what it means to live a full life and to die, in the grace of God.
Yep.
And let's actually, rather than seeing that as a failure or as something that should
or even as a battle. I'm not sure we should even see it as a battle.
The battle's between good and evil. It's not between life and death.
No,
Death
exactly. Death is to be conquered. Yeah, and that's a different kind of thing. Well said. I like that. I like your answer there. And for those of you out there, if you like the answer, or even if you didn't, go ahead and give a like to the video at least, okay? Especially if you didn't. Go ahead and give us a like. It actually helps the channel a lot, and it's one way that you can help support this show without it costing you anything at all. Just go over there and find the like button and go ahead and hit it, please. And a big thank you to all of our moderators who are out there in the various platforms reminding you to do this, okay? It's a lot of work to be a moderator for us because we're always doing something. Okay, Brandon, what's our next question?
So the next question comes from April. She asks, my understanding is that the archetypes are what control us. Is it all archetypes or just some?
Okay, and this is a metaphysical question for people that are studying some of the esoteric mysticism that I teach. This is not really, I don't think, a question that is going to relate to a lot of the audience, because you have to have some of the framework that we have discussed over the last 5 years as prerequisite information. April's a student here. So, and I've kind of touched on some of this on this show, where we do, and we're going to have to qualify it tonight as well, because some of the answers to tonight's misconceptions are answered by metaphysical or more of a metaphysical philosophical response than a religious one. But I see the universe is being made up of archetypal patterns. I think human behavior is entirely a manifestation of a collection of these. And so when I'm teaching how human behavior comes into being, how the ego and the self-identity comes into being, I do so through the recognition of which archetypes dominate in that person's personality. There are countless archetypes that make up the human experience. The tarot deck isolates the 78 primary ones from which all the others derive. So you have 78 cards in the tarot deck, 78 archetypes that represent the 78 primary archetypal patterns of human experience. And so, but out of those come countless others. Okay, there's all these little, I call them grandchild archetypes that sort of spawn off of the parent archetypes. And these things give us some kind of perspective on who we are, what we're going to become, and what kind of proclivities we have, and what kind of paradigms we create, and what biases we might subscribe to. But they're not really in control of us in a powerless sense. Okay, so we can't compare it to something like in the fuller question. This is, Brandon read you just the primary question, but she qualified it with some more information about dissociative identity disorder, which used to be referred to as multiple personality disorder, rather. And that's being, having all of these different archetypal personalities controlling you. You don't have a choice in that matter. People that have this condition do not choose to have this condition. But we are actually choosing to be controlled by these forces of archetypes that really sort of seduce us into doing the things that they want us to do. And I have been one to say, Jung might not like this one, but I think if we were to have a conversation, he'd understand what I was saying when I say that archetypes are sentient. They are. They really are. They're not just processes in our brains, and we don't give them their power. In a lot of ways, they give us everything that we understand to be our identity, which is really where the problem comes from. So it's control in a complicit sense, okay? And we freely choose the personas that they give us through the seduction of it. And we don't fight it because human beings are largely lazy and apathetic about everything. Spirituality being the primary thing that they're lazy and apathetic about. And they're not very good with keeping their psychological health either. People are all very bad at that. They're real, you'll see people and they're jogging and they're on the treadmill every day and they're lifting weights and they're eating all this healthy food, but they don't take care of themselves mentally at all. Emotionally, not at all. They're very abusive. People are typically very abusive to themselves emotionally. And that is worse, in my opinion, than, drinking too much or taking in too much saturated fat. I really think that, honestly.
Sorry. The latter is impossible.
What?
You can't take in enough saturated fat, let me tell you.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't look massively overweight. I eat saturated fat all the time.
And what's going to keep you living a good, healthy, long life is the fact that you have an emotionally healthy center. Yeah. And that's, I think, the difference.
That's so right what you just said. And that's why, the sort of, to use demon not in the fallen angel sense, the demon that possesses people in not exploring their thoughts, their spirituality, their connection to God, is the demon of busyness, and that's all part of it. So lifting weights, this workplace, it'd all fall apart if I wasn't here. No, it wouldn't. When you die, someone else will do your job.
Yeah.
It's like you're actually those in that sense. Everyone's completely replaceable, but in the spiritual sense, you're priceless. Mm-hmm. And so and people, busyness is normally revolving around very temporal concerns. Now, don't get me wrong, we live. I have to have a roof over my head and clothes on my body and saturated fat to eat.
Me too.
Those things should serve the real meaning of life, which is to serve. Well, we would say is to serve Christ. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, none of whatever you think about concepts of faith and religion, if we don't invest time in our own spiritual welfare, and for me, it's inseparable from psychological welfare, right?
I agree completely.
They are inseparable things. Mm-hmm. In fact, atheistic psychiatrists would agree with what I've just said. Mm-hmm. And they're inseparable. And so now that's the problem is we've got so few guides. When people, I hear Americans, even on this show, when they refer to Native Americans, they've got this really, even though they might have no connection to it ethnically, they have a very, very clear sense that, Native Americans, they've got, spiritual gurus or fathers within that, shaman, whatever, within that culture that help guide people. And that's really amazing. They're spiritually guided by these great spiritual guides. And you don't think you need that? But there's so few spiritual guides available, able, trained, set aside to do that in Western culture. And they're getting fewer, which is why people watch this show.
I think so.
And it's why you do it. It's why you tolerate that equipment.
Tolerate is a kind word, but yes, you are right.
It gets ugly behind the scenes. People.
It does. Oh, sometimes you can just tell from my facial expressions that the shit has hit the fan. Not tonight, though.
Brandon and I get a sneak preview before the show as to how it's going to start.
You can tell. Just look at my face.
We can't hear you, but we can see you in your face.
You can probably see me blurting out the profanities and the obscenities. It's coming. Poor, good thing you're a cop because you've heard it all.
I ain't heard it. I probably said it.
So there you go. Brandon, what's our next one?
So the third question is a potential biblical contradiction.
Okay.
In Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 30, this is the story of Jacob wrestling with God, in which Jacob claims he saw God face to face and lived. But if that's the case, what if Exodus 33, verse 20, that says, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live"? And also to add 1 John 4, chapter 12, it says, "No one has ever seen God." So which is it?
Okay, so these are not contradictions, okay, because we're describing different types of theophany. All right, and theophany is always going to be unique to the individual experiencer. Okay, and what is being discussed here is different types of experiences with God. Some that are quite intimate and due to the limitations of the human, the human ability to communicate in the English language and everything else, or in this case, Hebrew or Greek, you're going to, of course, have to use analogy or metaphor or some kind of poetic license to be able to convey ineffable things. So, no, they're not contradictions because they are, first of all, you give three examples here: Genesis, Exodus, and First John. Now, Genesis and Exodus, I know that tradition likes to say this was Moses that wrote this stuff down. It wasn't, okay.
The bit where he talks about him dying.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. The Pentateuch, it was written by several different authors that have been lost to time. And the reason that largely they were lost to time is because they were not the important part to remember, and they didn't want to be remembered. They wanted the message to be remembered. So, the motivation for writing things back now, we're much more egotistical today. So now, you have to have your bestseller on the New York Times list, and you want your picture on the back of the book, and you want your big, I've seen novels where they put the name bigger than the title because they really want to push that author. In the ancient world, it was a very different matter. That was not the motivation. First of all, you didn't make money writing things down. In fact, it cost you a lot to write things down because paper was really expensive, and the literacy to write it down was very expensive. So there was just no way that you were worried about making money with this.
And ink was really expensive.
Ink was yes, absolutely. Yeah. So these are different authors which are describing three very different unrelated faith accounts. In fact, the entire Bible is made up of countless individual faith accounts. And the point that's being produced here is that each one is describing a different type of theophany. And what that is an encounter with God, a tangible encounter with God. Something in which it wasn't just a vision. It was something in which God tangibly interacted with the person who had the experience. And the Bible's full of these, and these are three different examples. In a sense that seeing the face of God in that particular context is dependent upon how that particular faith account was expressed. Certainly, all of the apostles saw the face of God, because Jesus was the face of God. Okay, Jesus Absolutely. Is the face of God, right? But it's also very different than somebody saying, what Moses was interacting with at the burning bush, when it's like, don't look at me, you'll surely burn up. There's a reason for that too.
This question is a brilliant question because it really all theology is present in this question. So,
yes.
If you look at those instances I was going to say, the apostles saw the face of Jesus, and in fact, so did Pontius Pilate, and so did the chief priest, right?
Yeah.
So
that's right.
But also, two other things. I'll restrict myself to two other things, okay, on this.
Only two?
I'm going to try.
Go for it. Let's see if we'll hold you to it. We'll hold you to it.
The first is in all three of those instances, there is a cost to the people who have that theophany, right? So, the wrestle with the angel, he ends up walking with a limp for the rest of his life. Okay, and that's why he's renamed Israel, one who wrestles with God, one who struggles. Right? He's, in other words, the encounter with the living God
has consequences.
Has a consequence, right? The same is true of Moses So Moses radiates having been in the presence of God on the mountain, but when he comes down, he throws the 10 Commandments on the floor because they're all worshiping an idol. He, when he tries to get the water from the rock without God's assistance, he can't enter the Holy Land, and so he dies. With 1 John, there's a sacrifice clearly associated with that, and so the other thing is, all of us die. So the second part of this is that another way of thinking about, or another theology of saying no one can see the face of God and live, is to say that's actually a vision of heaven. In other words, we can't be on this earth in temporal life and be in the beatific vision of God at the same time.
Well, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that.
We will be in the beatific vision of God.
There's a consequence. There's a consequence to God the Father. Now, God, you could look at it. We kind of talked a bit about this on last Sunday because it was Trinity Sunday, and always the mystery of the Holy Trinity is something that we try to contemplate on that day. It's a day reserved for that. It's a solemnity reserved for that. And getting into trying to explain to Christians the nature of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is a good way to kind of ease into this question, because the Father, you could say, is God in all of his unknowable forms, in his ineffable forms, and in this particular sense, okay, God. And this is why Jesus is the perfect mediator and the only mediator between man and God, is because he literally is the bridge himself. He is both God and man. And that's what's required here. And why is that required? Because God in his perfection literally perfects everything around him. Therefore, wherever the God in his perfect nature as the Father in his ineffable sense were to exist, would literally destroy anything that's imperfect in his presence, which is us. So we would burn up. Literally, we burn up because our imperfections would consume us in the presence of something so perfect. This is also why the ground is holy. And he tells Moses to remove his shoes. This is because God being present there in that particular way, in the way of the Father, is literally it disintegrates anything imperfect, and because we're so imperfect, we wouldn't last.
We're creatures.
Yes,
because we're creatures, and he's uncreated,
and
so we're different. We're different stuff,
which is where it becomes, theosis becomes so essential, because we have to be made like him in order to coexist with him as we were intended to. We are made perfect in the sense that he is perfect, and
that's possible because he became like us.
Because yes, he makes our nature perfect again. And as long as we follow the path of Christ, exactly. As long as we follow the path of Christ, we can become perfect like his, and then we can experience the Father. We won't burn up. We'll see him face to face in that particular sense. So, these three biblical passages are three very different faith accounts from three very different authors over the course of countless years. Thousands of years in some cases. 1 John to Genesis, you're talking thousands.
I'd say.
Yeah, at least. So you're talking a very different way of speaking. You're talking two different languages, Greek and Hebrew. You're talking about very different variations. And then when you just condense them down into an English translation, you're going to lose all that nuance. And you have to understand that.
It's also the essence of because you set out the problem. I'm using the word problem in the academic sense, which is that the experience of, let's be honest, we're really talking about Protestantism and within a certain American tradition.
Yeah, they didn't exactly explain any of this in Protestant Sunday school. I was there.
The fundamental disagreement is that they've made a category error when it comes to the Bible. And, they will say, you play down the Bible. That's not true. we actually, well, first of all, we read more of it in our liturgies
And understand more
by
of
far. We read all of it, not just our favorite bits, but also, but also because they've restricted. I think it's a false restriction. They falsely restricted themselves to what is in a version of the canon of Scripture. Of course, they've chucked out some things that don't suit their theological predispositions. Because of that, you're then, and because they, in error, I believe, say only Scripture should interpret Scripture, rather than the entire revelation of God, which includes not just the fathers of the church and the church as still exists today, but also the oral tradition that's behind the Hebrew Scriptures as well.
Yes.
And so because they've restricted it to these, what I believe is a category error on the Scriptures, that's the source of these questions.
Yes.
Because, but this is in conflict with this, so how can we think that? And the answer is because at the source of how you can conceptualize what the Bible is and where authority lies within the church and how theological or doctrinal authority is generated, because that is skew. You can't make sense of these things at the end of that thought process. So we are making a very fundamental challenge to all of these things, which says these questions or these ways of thinking, the source of them is a misdirection. And so you've been misdirected into how to think about these things. And what we're trying to do is to correct that, and say, without being, because I don't want to be somebody that says, they're all evil and doing terrible things in these Bible Belt churches, because they're not.
No, but they are making the fundamental error of reading the Bible wrong. As if it's like one work written by one person, because they see it as God wrote it. And I keep trying to tell these people, this is not the Quran. We are not Muslims.
No, I know.
We do not feel that this is a dictation from God verbatim. This is a collection of faith accounts over the course of 4,000 years. That's a very different matter. And it's going to have...
I completely agree. And I think they're totally wrong.
Yeah.
But what I don't want to do is ignore some of the fruits that come from them, which is, in fact, they do seem to imbue, good communities of morally upright people. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, basically. I mean, I think they're wrong and they've got a category error. And it's great that we've got this show to answer some of these natural questions that flow from that incorrect approach. But I don't want them to think that I'm their enemy. No,
that's not fruitful.
They're doing in earnest. And they do, in fact, bring people to faith. Albeit, there's a ways to go. After that, we could help them to, have a more integrated life between their which goes back to what we were saying before. That spiritual guidance that helps them to integrate the Christian faith with their lives.
Well, speaking of integration, okay, and some of the misconceptions that are out there, we received, and I've saved this one for today. This evening, or the past evening, I should say, last night, say, we received a email, the church did, from an individual. I'm not going to give names. I don't want to call anybody out, but it's something that I think is probably, well, let me just say this. This is a question that's come up more than once. It doesn't come up terribly often, but I do get it. This one was a strange one because the question was in the subject line and the body of the email was empty. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I had the church answer it. And so the question is very simple. Hey, I would like to become a bishop. What is the process? So we're gonna come.
How you doing?
Yeah, there's a little madness in this question. A little madness in this. So let's talk about that for a second, because I think this is something that does come up. Well, first of all, nobody says I want to be a bishop and this is not a career path that you choose. This is a path that is chosen for you. Okay, so you are selected when there is a need within the particular community that you serve, where those particular sacramental functions are necessary. And that, in that case, candidates are selected on that basis. So nobody goes into this saying, I'm going to be a bishop. You are selected, okay, by the administration of your church when there is a need. And I can tell you right now, if you go at it being like, I want to be a bishop, they're probably never going to consider you. That's just not the way this works. So let's talk about the process of how one becomes a bishop. I'll explain it in terms of how the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church deals with it, and then we'll kind of talk about how it's a little bit different. Well, quite a bit different in the Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches, okay? So in the Nicolean Catholic Church, because it's an ISM church, which means the Independent Sacramental Movement, okay, and we don't have the larger support of the Roman Catholic establishment, we have to, out of necessity, do things a little bit differently. So some of the criteria is a little less stringent in the ISM. Some churches are very, very loose. Others are like us, where we actually have protocols in place and objectives to follow. It might not be as strict as it is in the conventional establishment, but there is still a lot of work involved. So in the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church, let's just say if a person, you wouldn't come to us and say, I want to be a bishop. You'd come to us and say, I think I have a vocation to priesthood. I feel called to be a priest. If that's the case, then the first question that needs to happen is, are you, how long have you been as an established member of the church? And are you, in good standing? The problem is most of the people that ask this question are not members of this church, and so there is no standing, good or otherwise.
I am not members of any church.
Yeah, probably not. And so you can't just go to some church that you've never even been a part of. You've never supported, you've never attended any of their services. You're not part of their community and just, I want to be a priest for you or bishop. I mean, that's, nobody's going to do that in any church, even in the ISM. That's not going to be well received because if
they do, you don't want to be in that church.
You don't. That's like a diploma factory kind of place. It's like these places where you, like the Universal Life Church, where you just, you fill out something, you give them $20 and they send you a certificate in the mail. Yeah. I mean, that's not, it might be legal ordination, but it's not definitely a spiritually valid one. So, if you're going to if you want to be a valid priest or bishop, you wouldn't want to be a bishop, but if you wanted to be a valid priest and serve in this capacity, you're going to have to do things the valid way. So that means you're already an established member of the church. You've been a part of the church for an extended period of time. And then you've demonstrated to a certain degree that there's some type of calling there. So when you come to your vocation director or your pastor or whoever you mention this to at first, they can already recognize, I've seen something of your vocation. They might even call it to your attention if it's really prominent. But anyway, a lot of times they just let you come to your own conclusion between you and God, and then you present it to them, and then they help you through it. Once that's established, you enter into a discernment process with your vocation director, and they take you through the various stages for several months where you discern. And we try to rule out the possibility that maybe it's something else, because we want to be sure that God is truly calling you to be a priest. And if the church decides with you, along as the candidate, that yes, you've been a member of many years, you've served your community, you support your community, and you want to serve it now as a priest, and the church agrees that God's calling you, and you agree that God's calling you, then at that point you are brought into, at least in the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church, you're brought into its seminary mentorship program. Same in a lot of ways as how the Roman Catholic Church does it, only the Roman Catholic Church has their own seminaries they send you to, and they are typically accredited universities where you get an accredited degree. If you're starting from high school, then you're going to go into the minor seminary, which is basically undergraduate school. And then after you complete that, you go into the major seminary, which is another 3-4 years of graduate school, where you come out with a master's of divinity and sometimes some other degrees as well. And then at the point after you've completed 7-8 years of education, then in your last year, typically, of major seminary, you are in the Roman Catholic Church ordained to the transitional diaconate. In the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church, we don't have the luxury of our own seminaries. We don't have the resources to send you to college. So, if you want to be a priest in the Nicolaitan Church, you're going to have to put yourself through college. And while we're not going to require a graduate degree, although those are preferred, at least a bachelor's is necessary to become a priest in the Nicolaitan Church, and an associate's is necessary to be a deacon, a permanent deacon. If you're a transitional deacon, which is the stage right before you are ordained to the priesthood, then a bachelor's degree is required for that. Okay. Graduates very much preferred, though. And so if two candidates and you can only take one, and one has a bachelor's degree and one has a master's, the master's is going to be the one that is selected. I hate to say it. It's just because there is a lot of intellectual work that's involved in this field, and we don't have the luxury of not having a full, well-rounded education. But out of necessity, sometimes we have to take bachelor's degrees. And in the Nicolaitan Church, we have allowances for that as long as the people continue their education and are going through our personal seminary program that we offer. There's also mentorship with your bishop, which in this case would be me. And that would mean you're serving the local Atlanta community. So we're not going to ordain priests so that you can go back to Timbuktu and create a church out there. That's not how we started out doing that. It did not work. We're not doing that ever again. You need to serve this community. Okay, we don't need to have churches out there. We have a church right here that needs your help. So if you want to be a part of this, you're going to need to be here in Atlanta to be serving this community. So after you've completed our seminary program, which is actually, as Jamie can tell you, because she's been through parts of it, she is considering becoming a deaconess in this church. We actually have a deaconess program in this particular church, and seminary is required for that. And she's been through. It's the same seminary that the priests go through, even though it's not a sacramental ordination. It's still it's sort of an extension of like subdeacon. It would be the equivalent of subdeacon. So anyway,
it's an ancient practice.
It is ancient.
It's an ancient practice.
It is
for all those trad caths that actually don't know anything about tradition.
For all of them throwing fit right now. She can't do that.
I know, right?
Deaconesses were the norm, and if you don't believe me, there's one called Phoebe in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And so, but look, just to zoom out a little bit on this. A man can feel called to the priesthood, and that's legitimate. And like you said, that's tested. And all sacramental traditions, Anglicans, Catholics, Orthodox, independent Catholics go through a version of that process, right? But I think a lot of Anglicans have this wrong. I know this from experience. Anglicans are really confused about what a bishop is. And they've got this mixture between a sort of Protestant super pastor and a sacramental bishop. Mm-hmm. And I, in my experience, Anglican bishops have treated it as though they are the priest for the diocese, and the priests are just like shadows. They're just placeholders for them. Mm-hmm. It's all about their position, and priests are just that. The truth, and Catholics and Orthodox, and I know you and me, the truth is that the bishop is the fullness of the priestly order.
Right.
Now, what that means, this is a bit technical, that language. What that means in practice is that a man can feel called to the priesthood, and that's something that's discerned between that man and the church. But the church decides they need you to be a bishop.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
So nobody says, God's called me to be a bishop.
No.
That's not how it works.
That's not how it
You're
works.
a priest, and basically bishops are, and I'll say this slightly tongue-in-cheek, a necessary evil in the life of the church. Okay?
Oh no, you're not going to have to tiptoe around me with that one, because I agree completely.
Oh, no, that's not what I was suggesting. But bishops are the way that Christ has ordered his church that it can continue in terms of the teaching authority of the church and the ordination of the next generation.
Correct.
And so we need bishops in the church, but we don't need many of them. And they should be like manure spread thinly across the field.
You do try to reduce it. You try to keep it to a minimum as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So so basically, after you've completed the seminary mentorship program, or are coming up on completing it, you'll be ordained in this church to the transitional diaconate for about 1 year, where you serve as a deacon. And then at the completion of that service, assuming all things are well, and you've completed the seminary mentorship program, you are then ordained to be a priest serving the Atlanta ministry here as a priest. Then, and only then, after probably at least 3 years of service, if a need arises where another bishop would be required, which in the case of the Nicolaitan Church would be something that is possible, because no church should only have one. That's too thin. We should at least have 3. That would be standard. In fact, consecrations to the episcopacy should be laid on hands by 3 bishops. That way, if one's having an off day, the other 2 kind of, at least the sacrament's valid, at least with the other 2. Yeah, it's really more, it's not necessary. One bishop can consecrate another bishop. You don't need more than one. It's just, it's preferred practice to have 3.
It's good order.
It's good order.
Good order to have 3.
Yeah.
Not least because it also represents that the church, it's not just one bishop going rogue. Having 3 bishops is also, as well as sacramental surety, is a symbol that the whole church is present.
Correct. And Paul is asking, are cardinals those chosen by the Pope in Roman Catholicism? So yes,
cardinals
are.
Only since Vatican II have cardinals had to be bishops.
Right. Well, even the Pope technically does not need to be a bishop. It is something that
the minimum requirement for the Pope to be the Pope is to be male.
Yeah, that's right. You could actually be
male,
that's
baptized.
True. Yeah.
Like baptized is after, so male.
But baptized. You'll never see that.
Bummer.
You'll never see that.
No.
But the reality is, yes, cardinals are chosen by the Pope, and they basically are the liaisons between various jurisdictions around the world and the Vatican. They're almost always bishops,
and it's an administrative role. It's not an order.
Yeah, it's not. And they're just bishops. And even remember, the Pope is really just a bishop too. He's the Bishop of Rome. He doesn't have any more holy orders than I do. The reality is, it's a different office. But it's not a different sacramental authority or power. And honestly, I take the Orthodox view on it. I see him as just first among equals,
so
and I don't see him as anything special. It's just another patriarch, and he gets the same prayers as all the other ones do. Anyway, we're at the end of this hour, and when we come back, we'll start we already been talking theology, but we're going to go down the rabbit hole with Brandon on theology. Don't go away.
been lost and alone in the city of lights I know. Getting high, feeling low, and it's out of your control. You should know that I won't leave you. I'll stay beside you. I'm never letting you go. You've been lost and alone in the city of lights I know. But I will guide you home. But I will guide you home. But I will guide you home. Fight your battles, always by yourself. In the shadows, hear you cry for help. No matter the distance, I will always be there. No more inhibitions, I'll show you I care. You've been lost and alone in the city of lights I know. I know. Getting high, feeling low, and it's out of your control. You should know that I won't leave you. I'll stay beside you. I'm never letting you go. You've been lost and alone in the city of lights I know. But I will guide you home.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of Vestiges After Dark as we get ready here to discuss theological misconceptions with Brandon giving us the misconception and Father Chris and myself, Jamie, trying to bring some clarity to the issue. I think there's a lot of these misconceptions that perhaps are not really misconceptions as much as they're not just fully understood or realized. There's a lot of ignorance that surrounds some of these issues. So we'll try to clear it up a lot. Okay. So you're going to have a good time and we'll be taking your calls in the third hour. So don't go anywhere. Okay, everybody, we are now back and we are going to be talking about theological contradictions. Now, in order to really be able to tackle this subject matter, we're going to have to qualify it with a few things. I think it's important to understand that some of these misconceptions are misconceptions from an esoteric Christian point of view, and sometimes they're misconceptions from a standardized Catholic point of view. There is slight differences in approach between Nicolaitanian Catholicism and Roman Catholicism. The fundamentals aren't different, but there's a different depth of understanding between the two churches, and that's because we can utilize in this a more non-dogmatic approach in this church. So when these situations come up, when these questions come up, if they come up tonight, I will have to qualify that with each one. So just bear that in mind before we get started here, and that way we have proper context going forward. Now, while we were on break, Mystic asked in the chat that what are other ways, or what ways do I suggest that people can serve their churches without having to take holy orders? Now, it is important to understand, okay, that I think people think that clergy are the church. They are they are not the church. Everybody's the church, okay? Clergy are just one role in the church. And it's a very small role. We handle the sacramental stuff, okay? That's why we're set apart for that purpose, the function of sacramental conferring. And even then, there's limitations with that too, because really, the sacrament of baptism can be conferred by anyone. It's supposed to be conferred by a priest, ideally, but anybody can actually confer that one. But the Eucharist is, and hearing confessions are the predominant ones. Matrimony, that's actually just basically the church acts as a witness. It's the man and woman that confer it on each other. So there's actually, when you break it down, very little that clergy really do in the church. It's actually the lay people that keep the church functioning. They're the ones that support it financially. They're typically the ones that run it administratively too. Theologically, yes, that's left to the clergy, but let's not forget all of the brothers and sisters, all the nuns and monks out there. Most of them are not clergy. Okay, in the Roman Catholic Church, a nun is not clerical. It's not a clergy position. A brother is not a clergy. I think sometimes we think of them as clergy. They are not clergy technically. In the Nicolaitanian Church, this creates some confusion. When we had a religious order and we had nuns, they were considered clergy because they also had received our minor orders. Okay, and minor orders in this church is considered a clerical office, but not sacramental office, though. Okay, so different churches approach this different ways, but let's not forget that the laity are the predominant part of the church, the biggest part of the church, and I would dare I say the most important part of the church, really, because it is there where the experience of God actually is transferred from person to person. So it's a very it's a very erroneous approach to go into church and think that the priest is there and he runs everything and he's supposed to do it all. No, it's really, you're supposed to be there, doing it with each other, and the priest is there to provide the sacramental grace so that you can continue to do that work. So when you look at when you look at all, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's actually a form of clericalism that's not from the clergy.
Yes, it's true.
It suits a lot of people very well in a parish, and I know I've run a few. It suits people very well in a parish to say that's the priest's job. Yeah. What? So it's the priest's job to convert everybody in the town, to teach every child in school, to catechize every single adult that comes to faith. I don't think so. So this works both ways. Like, some people think, the clergy want to keep it all to themselves. No doubt those clergy exist. They don't exist for long because they have a nervous breakdown and end up, dribbling in a corner somewhere. It's fundamentally opposed to what priests are supposed to do. If you think about the classic parish image, which is sadly receding in the West now, the idea is you have one bishop for a big region. You have a priest in a parish or in a chaplaincy. who they, and the bishop's job is to be the pastor to the pastors, to make sure the priests are equipped and trained and healthy and cared for. The priest's job is to equip the faithful. Read through Ephesians and Colossians very carefully. You'll see this. To equip the faithful to continue the work of Christ in their community, which is why ultimately, look, a priest is replaceable in a parish. Again, I've been tempted to deceive myself that, I'm irreplaceable. Oh, after me, the deluge. But it's not true. The priest is there. The unique sacramental abilities, powers, they are powers, authorities that a priest has is to absolve sins and to Christ makes present his body and blood through his hands. The bishop has the additional one of being able to ordain,
create new priests.
Yeah. And so almost all ministry ever done in the entire history of the church and around the world today is by lay people. Yeah. And that is how it's supposed to be.
That's exactly how it's supposed to be. And that's why I always say it's your church. I'm just part of it. Stop thinking I'm the church. I'm not the church. When you donate to this ministry, you're not giving me money. You're giving money to the church. It is not my coffers. It's the church's coffers you're supporting. My life is completely separate from it. Okay. Completely, particularly the finances. So I think it's an important thing to realize. There's no limit to what you can do. So if you're asking what can a layperson do, everything except the sacramental operations. That's it. Even administration is largely, in the Roman Catholic Church in particular, a layperson's position. Many of the chancery, it's all lay people. All lay people.
One of my major criticisms of churches, Roman Catholic, Anglican, Orthodox even, although less often in Orthodox for different reasons, but is that they have ordained bishops and priests entirely spending their time doing things that don't involve the sacraments. Mm-hmm. Why have a bishop or priest doing that?
Doesn't make sense.
There are some way you could say, look, it's probably good that
usually he's the most qualified. That's the problem, is that he's probably the most educated, so they send him in. That's really what it comes down to.
There are some occasions be the most appropriate.
Oh, I think Father Chris is frozen.
Freezing up.
I think if a priest and bishops listening to this show who are not regularly celebrating the sacraments, they should really question what they're doing.
I agree with that completely. Okay, so I guess that's our first misconception. It wasn't one given by Brandon, but the first misconception is what can lay people do? And it is a good one. I'm not sure that Danielle intended that to be really relevant, but it is relevant in the sense that, that's a big misconception. People think that you have to be a priest to do anything in the church. No, it's really the opposite. Just sacramental operations. That's it. Okay, Brandon, why don't you give us our first? You're welcome, Danielle. What is our first misconception that you'd like to cover tonight? I am not going to guide this in any way. I've got my notes. You gave me the topics of interest, and I've got notes that I wrote on each one. That I can reference here if I can find it. And that will, help guide the answer. So ask your topic of interest. I will give my answer. Father Chris will give his, Jamie will give her input, and then we'll discuss it until we've beaten it dry, and then we'll go to the next one. Let's go.
All right, so the very first one, and there's a reason why I had this number one on my list, is growing up, we were taught basically to fear the devil, but mainly that the devil is in the entire Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I remember when I had talked to someone, they made the comment that they were wanting to play the devil's advocate in a conversation, but didn't like that word because the devil wants to steal, kill, and destroy everyone. So it was that instilled fear of the devil. But the first misconception is the devil being in the Old Testament.
what we see as the devil, what's called the devil in the New Testament, is definitely a very different thing than anything that is equated to the same being, if we will, if we're going to go down that route. It's different than its points that are brought up in the Old Testament. The first one, of course, being the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Another example is, of course, the Satan, the accuser in God's court in Job. These are two predominant examples, but it is very important to make known that ancient Judaism, pre-apocalyptic Judaism, I should say, did not have a devil. It didn't. It just didn't, because that would have been seen as too Zoroastrian. It would have been like, God has nothing that can compete with him. You couldn't have something that could actually challenge God in any way. It would be a ridiculous notion, and not until apocalyptic times, which was happening in the intertestamental period, where you start to see some of that change. And this is where you get the stories of the fallen angels and the war in heaven, that this is where all of a sudden, for the first time, God can be challenged. And this is a shift, a paradigm shift, a major paradigm shift in Jewish theology that did, unfortunately, and I say that with intent, it unfortunately adversely affected Christian thinking going forward. So that's important to understand that. Does this mean the devil doesn't exist? No, that's not what I'm saying at all, because Christ obviously interacts with this thing. But I'm going to argue, and I've argued this before, that what Christ contends. All right, so it looks like we're staying connected on Spreaker. Father Chris, can you hear me?
You're back now. Yeah.
Okay, so
you're just pausing a bit.
Okay, so it looks like we're having some kind of, let me make sure that there's no, because we ran some tests and there was no issue with the internet, but there are some storms in the area, aren't there, tonight?
I don't know. There may be some pop-ups.
I think there were some pop-ups.
It feels like that sort of disruption.
Okay, because I'm not seeing any issues on my end. All right,
and
so,
you're fine now.
Okay, good. So are we back on, all right, are we back on YouTube too?
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like we're successfully connected. Okay, everybody on YouTube, could somebody please tell me, make sure that I know we're connected. We never lost Spreaker, I don't think. Spreaker doesn't really, we're back. Okay, thank you, Tracy. Tracy got that over. I'm sorry about that. So could someone tell me what was the last thing you heard me say?
You said Christ.
I said Christ. Okay.
It was basically the key bit of what you were saying.
It was fundamental. Okay, so basically, let me take it back to that. So what we have in the New Testament, what Christ contends with, all right, is a very fundamentally different thing than anything that is referred to as the devil from Christian vantage point in the Old Testament. The serpent in the Garden of Eden is not the devil that tempts Jesus in the desert in the same way. It is a similar operation, because in Jewish theology, the serpent in the Garden of Eden is Yetzer Hara. It's the personification of man's proclivity to do the wrong thing. That's all it is. It's not another being. It's not some spirit or fallen angel or anything like that. There was no concept of a fallen angel in Judaism until the intertestamental period, and that was because of the apocalypticism and that new shift in the paradigm of Jewish theology. When you look at the book of Job, again, Satan is working in union with God, not against him. The accuser is against humanity, saying, I'm going to find any fault if there is one. But it's just like the prosecuting attorney in court is not against the judge. He's working in a particular capacity. He has a particular function within the judicial system so that the truth can be found.
Justice, actually.
It is true. Yes, exactly. So this is not some competitor to God. It's not some, this boogeyman that lives under your bed. We're talking about a very different thing. And Judaism has maintained that all the way up until the apocalyptic period, which is just about 100, 200 years, maybe even 300 years before Jesus. That's when it starts to rear its ugly head. And this is where you start to get the concept of fallen angels, a war in heaven, and then that God can actually be competed against, can fight against him. And not that you're going to win, but the idea is that, there's going to be consequences, okay? And this is where you get these evil beings. And this became adopted by Christianity. Now, fast forward to Jesus being tempted in the desert, because that's the first time you really encounter the devil in the New Testament. So what is this? Who is this individual that's, well, it is Yetzer Hara, because it is, in a sense, the nature of fallen humanity tempting Jesus, but Jesus doesn't have fallen humanity. He is perfect. He is sinless. Okay, he has taken on the frailty of humanity, but he does not take on the sinfulness of humanity. So Jesus is not a fallen creature. Okay, even though he was born, in a sense, he's not created. He's still uncreated, but he is born through the sinlessness of the Virgin Mary, and is sinless himself.
Born of the Father.
Yes, exactly. So now, who is tempting him then? Whose Yetzer Hara is that? Well, now you got to get to esoteric Christianity, because the Roman Catholic Christianity doesn't have this. The Orthodoxy kind of alludes to it a little bit, but doesn't really go there. I've gone there, and I will continue to go there. The answer to this and where we get the devil as we know him today is not from the Old Testament, okay? The Jewish religion doesn't really have a framework for that. They don't believe in the devil. Even today, they don't believe in the devil. Okay, I've never met a Jew that believed in the devil. They believe in evil, but they believe in human evil, just like I do. Okay, who is the person tempting Jesus in the desert? It is the Yetzer Hara of the fallen nature of humanity itself. That separated from Jesus in his incarnation,
peeled away from him.
In the sense that in order for Jesus to take on human flesh, the Yetzer Hara can't come with it. Right. Jesus would be sinful then. He would have to be sinful if he kept the Yetzer Hara, which would mean that even though he chose not to act on the Yetzer Hara, he'd still have the inclinations to do the wrong thing. He would just always do the right thing. That's the Virgin Mary. See, Jesus and the Virgin Mary have two different types of sinlessness. Okay, the Virgin Mary's sinlessness is a choice not to do the wrong thing. She probably has the inclinations. I'm sure she did, but she chooses to always do the right thing. Jesus did not have the inclinations to sin. He was too perfect for it. But where did the Yetzer Hara of his human nature go? That's the devil. Now, the Roman Catholic Church won't tell you that, but I can tell you right now, I've never met a Cistercian or Carthusian monk that didn't agree with me on this one. And I think that when you really think about it, it makes perfect sense. So, Father, go for it. Jamie, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, it's over most people's heads, but if you think about it, it makes a heck of a lot more sense.
I think so. I think it brings it all together.
I know when you first explained that concept to me, I was like,
it's kind of mind blowing.
Like a light bulb came on.
It's a little mind blowing. Father, what do you think of that? What do you think of this thing?
I was just going to say, do you think to use a concept that I think is the same thing that you use in other places? Is it the sense that that devil that tempts Jesus is the thought form of every evil, sinful rebellion against God that humanity has ever managed to achieve? I
do. I think it's truly the Yetzer Hara of humanity itself. Because see, Jesus took on. I'm not opposed
to that, by the way.
Jesus took on. He didn't just become a man. He took on human nature. Mm-hmm. So in a way, he's the embodiment of all of human nature. So therefore, the part of him he could not keep from human nature, the Yetzer Hara, would have to be separated. And it would be the Yetzer Hara of all humanity, which would be exactly what you're saying, Father.
Yeah, so I mean, like us in all ways, except without sin,
yes.
as St. Paul says.
Mm-hmm.
But so look, I'm going to go a bit Jordan Peterson now, I think, because because I think that I think people get bogged down in all of this. To say that the devil is the an incorporeal projection of all of humanity's bad choices, evil decisions, is inseparable from the reality of the devil. Like, it's a false division to talk about, because what's the difference? I mean, it's a bit like when Jordan Peterson says things like, I live my life as though God is real and his standards are pure and correct. Mm-hmm. What's the difference between that and believing in God? Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So in a practical sense, it makes no difference. I mean, and I think it chimes pretty well with the Epistle of Peter. That the devil, as a roaring lion, wanders about seeking the ruin of souls. Again, conceptualizing what you've described would be completely arbitrary to say, oh no, you've got to believe it's this specific fallen angel Lucifer doing that. So what? What's the difference?
There isn't. One archetype versus another.
Yeah, and in lots of ways, actually, the kind of the sort of Luciferian approach to the devil that's often depicted in movies since the 1970s lets people. It does misguide people, mm-hmm. because the truth is that the devil's present when you instantiate the willful decision to be disobedient to God.
Yes.
So rather than looking at, as long as I keep that that horned beast away from my house, I'll be all right. No. The Christian faith says that's at work in you all the time.
Yes.
And so now,
and that's the danger.
Baptism, we've got the hope, and because Jesus Christ became one of us, that's the source of our salvation and the way by which that devil is conquered. But I think a lot of the kind of cartoon images of the devil, and I don't think that's what Dante was doing actually in the Inferno. I think that we looking at it 500 years later, we're misinterpreting because we can't help it because we're not from the same culture. But the devil's greatest trick is persuading the world he doesn't exist. And one way to do that is to become a caricature. Mm-hmm. And again, going back to this kind of spiritual guidance, a good priest will say, he won't say, your life's so bad, everyone's horrible to you, I love you, it's all right, God loves you. No, a good, not just priest, a good shaman, a good, whatever the spiritual tradition will be, is to say, all of that propensity to do the wrong thing and to bring misery to your life is within you.
Yes.
And so now that doesn't say that things don't come from the outside, of course not. But really, the icon for the Christian is St. Paul in chains, who declares his freedom.
Yes. See, I think the danger of not understanding the deeper message and just taking the face value story of the fallen angels, the war in heaven, Lucifer, and all that stuff, while that's not inaccurate, it is unfortunately misleading, because what it does is it's just one hairline stretch away from simply saying, oh, I'm not responsible for anything. It's the devil that made me do it. That's the problem.
I'm not involved in it.
And I'm not. Yeah, it's not my fault. I was tempted. I was manipulated. It wasn't. I'm a victim. I mean, I didn't choose to be a sinful person. I was born this way. That's the issue when you make the devil a caricature. Okay, when you make him separate than yourself, then the next step is to just simply say, "Oh, it's not my fault."
Or you actually see this in extreme Calvinism. So a very religious kind of approach to this is to say, yeah. So fallen angel Lucifer, that all happened, away from humanity, and God has solved the problem through the cross. And so actually, I'm not involved in it at all. I don't need to worry about it. So you can either have the very non-religious person that says I'm an existentialist and it's all mad and therefore I don't have to do anything. Okay, that's lazy. Or you can have the kind of super religious approach, which says God's fixed all of that, and therefore I haven't got to do anything. The far harder truth is that the devil is like St. Peter says, the devil is at work in us as well.
Yes,
and so we can either cooperate with that, ignore that, or combat that. And the way that we combat that, it's not an even battle. The way we combat that is God has conquered him ultimately, and therefore we can resist temptation.
I just want to confirm.
Jesus shows us how.
I just want to confirm here with the YouTube audience. Can you just let me know that the stream is good, because the software is acting very strange right now.
I've got you.
And you do? You're seeing us on there?
Right
Yeah, it's working on mine.
Okay, yeah, because I'm seeing a lot of strange things happening on my screen right now. Okay, it just looks like it all reset. So hopefully that fixes it, but I'm glad it's still working. Okay, thank you so much, Levi and Jamie. Thank you. So, Brandon, I know we've got so many topics tonight, so I don't want to drag on this one in particular, but does that answer the question to your satisfaction, or is there more that you need on it?
I know that is a far better or far deeper answer than I ever would have gotten. And it's
more demanding. It's more demanding than those Protestants that say the devil's going to get you. Actually, that's a far easier thing to deal with.
Yeah.
The devil's way more insidious than that. Literally, he is insidious.
Yeah.
And so, it's not like we're not being liberal and soft on these things. It's the opposite.
Right.
We're saying you got some big work to do to resist temptation.
Correct.
And that's a work that God will help you with, but you've got to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. So, all right, so let's go on to the next one on your mind.
So we can actually group together the next 2 and 3.
Okay.
Because they can be found in the same area of the Bible.
Okay.
And they are the Antichrist, like a singular figure called the Antichrist, and the event of the rapture.
Okay.
Rapture's BS.
Yeah. Well, let's deal with rapture, because that's probably easier. So we had this nut case from, unfortunately, Father Chris, your homeland gave us this guy. We can't blame America on this one, unfortunately, but it was John Nelson Darby, that had his own little delusions of grandeur when it came to biblical interpretation and theology. He was not qualified to comment on the Bible in the way that he thought. But, in the spirit of modern day Protestantism, that's what they do, right? Everybody can interpret the Bible themselves, so this is one of the consequences of that. So he taught that, rapture was an event that would happen in what became to be known in this particular form of theology as dispensationalism. And what that meant is he saw the Bible as being a succession of events, of ages that would have certain things that happened in them. Of course, this is one of the problems that we were talking about at the beginning of the show when we were discussing
last week.
How Protestants look at the Bible as this big cohesive book that is all one book written by one person, and it just isn't so. And so you can't have any dispensations from it because they weren't written as a cohesive collective. And God didn't write it. Okay, it's His word, but He didn't write it. It's His word through inspiration only. Man wrote it, and many men wrote it over the course of 4,000 years, as already established here. So to think that there's some kind of cohesive thought here other than the fact that salvation is available and that in the end everything works out okay. There's nothing else about it that is unified in that sense. So anyway, what does he teach? Well, he teaches that in the end times, which they don't see as being the age of the church like it's supposed to be, they see it as this thing that's going to happen when this Antichrist comes back, comes here to mislead the people and lead them to damnation. And so the idea here is that the faithful Christians will be taken up in the sky, because this is a mistelling of Thessalonians 4, chapter 4, where it says something about the Christians will be taken up in the sky with Jesus. Well, unfortunately for John Nestle Darby, if you actually studied theology correctly, you would have known that this is what happens at the resurrection of the dead. This is not happening before. Everybody is going to rise, and those that are saved will be taken up to heaven with Jesus. Yes, that is true, but that does not happen during this fake tribulation that you're waiting for. There is no period of tribulation. This is not something that, you want tribulation? Work out your salvation. There's your tribulation, okay? And if you succeed, yes, then you'll be taken up in the sky at the day of judgment, not before. And so you don't get to escape death. Jesus didn't escape death. You certainly don't. What are you, better than Jesus? Well, you think you're better than Jesus, so you're not going to die, but Jesus had to. Please, everybody has to face death. Everyone has to conquer death, as Jesus did. Jesus doesn't do it for us. He shows us how to do it. That's what salvation is. That's what the cross does. It gives us the grace to do it ourselves. Doesn't give us the grace to do it for us so we don't have to do it. See, that's the disconnect between this kind of Protestant evangelical theology and the correct older Catholic Orthodox theology, and the theology of the fathers of the church.
The question behind that is, can you lose your salvation? And for the predestination type Protestants, they don't believe that.
They don't,
right? Because they think, well, because I am predestined, and that's why I'm in this situation, and I'm one of the lucky few. I won't be lost. Well, that's not what the church has taught forever.
No.
And so now that doesn't, and of course they throw out, so you think you're saved by your good works? No, we don't think that either. So these are not binary things.
Right.
We're only saved through Jesus Christ,
right,
and his grace. But we can reject that grace.
We can at any time.
So it goes back to the and you said this on the show many times, the fundamental power that God gives us that he will not go against is freedom.
Right.
So we have the freedom to lose grace.
Yes, we can choose at any time to reject it. So just because you might have it now, and if you were to die this moment and enter into you would be entering into salvation, that does not mean 20 years from now that's going to be true. You could lose your faith. You could choose to live a different kind of life. You could go become a druggie and then commit all sorts of sins and not give a damn anymore. There's all sorts of things you could do.
And we actually believe the same thing in reverse, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why
yes, it is in reverse too. Yes.
We mentioned it on the show before. Somebody commits suicide. Yes, it's the most risky way to die.
Yes.
In terms of hell, but we also would believe that in the last moment of life, if there was regret and horror for having made that terrible choice, grace is available.
Yeah.
So we actually believe those things are the same thing. You can lose your faith in a moment and you can regain it in a moment.
Exactly. So now when we get to the next part of this dispensational tribulation kind of nonsense, where you get this Antichrist that's like some kind of person that's almost like it's almost as if the devil gives birth to some child, like in the movie,
the demonic Jesus.
The demonic Jesus. And he's going to come and he's going to be really charismatic and everyone's going to love him. And he's going to be, of course, he's every president in the United States since I've been born has been the Antichrist. Ronald Reagan was the Antichrist. Every pope. Yep. But the fact of the matter is, that's not how the New Testament or the fathers of the church understood the term. Okay. It refers to anyone who denies and works against Christ. Anyone, which means that, guess what? Every time you sin, you are an Antichrist every single time. Okay, so we've all been Antichrists. We will all continue to be Antichrists. So there's not one Antichrist.
So Peter was Antichrist when he denounced
Correct.
Jesus.
Correct.
I do not know this man.
And you would have recognized that.
And that's how we know that grace is still available if we are sorry.
Correct.
All we've got to do is choose to love the true God who is Jesus Christ.
Right.
And ask for his forgiveness. And that's also why Jesus comes and says, "Peace be with you," showing his wounded hands, but he says, "Peace be with you," and then he says, "Go and forgive the sins of the world." In other words, you're not thrown off a cliff because you cooperate with the anti or embody the Antichrist in terms of going against God's will. You're not thrown off a cliff by God. You're always able to come back.
Correct.
The door is unlocked from his side. We're the only ones that keep it closed.
Exactly. So when you get to this idea, so where did this kind of tribulation theology come from? Well, it's because in the book of Revelation, the Antichrist is almost referred to in a proper noun sense. Not really a proper noun, but it's referred to as a specific person. And so they have tried to, because again, these kinds of Protestant thinkers, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to single people out and criticize, just like Father Chris said, it's not beneficial. Okay, but the fact of the matter is there's real consequences when you teach this stuff, and somebody needs to correct it. That's what we're doing here tonight. All right, so the fact of the matter is, when you take the Bible as one cohesive story, one big book written by like one person, this is the kind of mistakes you make. So when the epistles of John talk about the antichrists, it's in the plural sense every single time.
Right.
Okay? It's all of those who work against the Christian message. But the book of Revelation is being specific in apocalyptic code to the early Christians who are being persecuted by Rome, because the fundamental antichrist they were dealing with back then was Caesar Nero.
Nero.
Yeah.
And so the antichrist was him. And so they were using this as a way so they wouldn't be, if it had gotten out, they could talk freely without sounding treasonous. That's all it was. But when you look at the book of Revelation, think that, this is the same thing that John's talking about in his epistles. Well, then you're going to start to think that, there's this one guy coming. He's going to come and he's going to, end the world. No, that's nonsense. So this is a big misconception today. I would say the Protestants are not as bad today in America, at least with this one. It's really evangelicalism that's pushing this one hard.
Right.
They're the real culprits today. And I think there's just, unfortunately, a lot of Protestant churches that are just backing it up. But that's a big one. Brandon, I think that's perhaps the biggest Christian misconception.
You don't have to scratch too far under the surface of, I think, most Protestant churches to see that their Christology is off.
Yeah, that's true.
Because all of this comes back to that. That's people say, Jesus is God's son. Yeah, he's God the Son.
Yeah.
And now, of course, both are perfectly allowable, theologically speaking, and in the scriptures and what have you. But
begotten, not made, though. Begotten, not made. That's the part that they're missing.
And therefore, the concept to think through and to live your life by is God the Son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
God in the flesh.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So there you go, Brandon. I don't know. I mean, comment if you wish.
No, because see, from what I read in 1 John, there are 4 different times that the word antichrist is used, but it's always in the plural, saying like, the antichrists have come, so many have come, or in that Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yep. No, that's exactly
so-
right.
A good rule of thumb for, if you are from a Protestant tradition or from no tradition and you read, because you should read the Bible. We're not saying don't read the Bible unless you're an expert. We're just saying
Read it, just don't reinterpret it.
Yeah. So a good rule of thumb is read a passage of scriptures and do it bit by bit. Don't the whole book of Revelation is a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so literally, people have written PhDs on individual passages from the book of Revelation.
And if you're going to interpret the book of Revelation, let me just you're going to need a biblical history degree. You're going to need a degree.
So even if you're just tinkering, right?
Yes.
At the very least, on Google, next to where you're reading the scripture,
Read the commentaries.
What does commentary of St. John Chrysostom on this passage?
Yeah.
Look at what other people have said who are far smarter than I am, and they said it far closer to the source of the writing of the scripture, and then look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Look at authoritative places.
Yes.
If you're going to take the risk of listening to a modern scholar, and that's okay, have a look at who they are, where they work for, where their PhD was issued. Because buying a degree from a garden shed in Nicaragua does not make you a scholar on the Bible.
Well, we got all sorts of armchair professionals today, Father. The Bible's the least of our problems, it seems. People are always thinking they're experts.
If you want a list of decent modern scholars on the scriptures, then I'm happy to help you out.
Yeah, we can definitely provide that if you need it. Okay, so I think we can probably do one more before the next break.
Okay, so I want to go ahead and skip the fourth one and go to the fifth one, because this actually goes back to when April was on the show about religious trauma. And this is for all the women out there. Women, this is not me saying it, this is a misconception I've been taught.
Well, you're not a woman.
Thank you.
So we
Bible, we did. Thank you. Women should be subservient to men, and they must be quiet.
Okay, so this is one of those times that we've discussed in the past where Paul's epistles are kind of like the way that we write text to people today.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody would write down some text or instant messages with the intent that this would be used as doctrine. You would not be writing it. You don't write texts or messages with the idea that, I've got to be careful about every single thing I say here so that it's not misinterpreted because this is going to be doctrine. It's not like you're writing a manifesto here. Paul wasn't writing this. His epistles were very casual, informal in many ways, messages to deal with particular churches that were having very specific types of problems. Now, in the particular,
and we only have one side of the text exchange as well.
We do. We only have his side. So what is pretty much understood is that this was being written to the church at Ephesus, and there was a lot of problems with some pagan groups that in these pagan circles were led by women who were coming in and creating havoc in the churches. They were acting like or at least some people believe that there were some that were coming in acting like they were interested in what was going on, but they were really there to be subversive to the community. And so in that understanding, when Paul says, the women should be quiet, what he's really referring to is that, these women need to be quiet. Okay. They, in that sense. Now, of course, he doesn't say it in that particular type of phraseology. He's using it in more of a generalized sense. At least it sounds that way. But we know from the rest of his writings that he had women in, as Father Chris mentioned earlier, many women in high level positions. Okay, working with him and under him, alongside him, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which again is inspired completely from Scripture, sacred tradition, the teachings of the fathers of the church. It all comes from that, and then it's all sort of like gathered together with the modern understanding of the magisterium as it exists today. Very clearly states the equality of men and women. Christianity is perhaps the most egalitarian religion, and it comes to men and women. You're not going to find that in Islam. You're not going to find that in Judaism.
The most egalitarian cultures in the world have come from the influence of Christianity.
Absolutely.
I mean, and this is what annoys me so much when, the most racist, unequal places in the world are all white Western countries.
Yes.
Really? Really?
Yeah.
Have a think about that.
Yeah.
Look, we are held to a higher standard, and I'm happy to be, and I want to be held to an even higher standard. We should be aiming for the best.
Yes.
So I understand. We welcome criticism in our culture, right?
Yes.
Christianity welcomes criticism because it will survive any. Apply Marxist criticism to Christianity, it will survive. Apply feminist Christianity to Christianity, it will survive. I think what you said, Bishop, is right about what was going on in Ephesus, and also the whole, the cult of priestesses in the Greek world at the time of St. Paul. But we also have to acknowledge that St. Paul is Jewish,
a product of his time,
from a Jewish background. Well, Jesus incarnated himself in that context because look,
he had
even
to.
Today, the church. Yeah,
he had to.
Yeah, indeed. But the church, but that also tells us something, right?
Yeah.
So, the church does not authorize women to preach sermons in churches. It doesn't. You have to be ordained. You have to be a deacon,
right?
At least. And so we still hold that when it comes to sacramental authority in the life of the church, that's for men. But a total misread of Ephesians would be to say, men are God's special ones, and you women just need to do as you're told. That is a complete misreading.
Yeah.
If you read entirely what St. Paul says, even though I think he is kind of. He's at his wit's saying, going, for goodness sake, just shut up and worship Jesus, right? That's basically what he's saying.
I think that's what he's saying. Just like when he was talking about to the Galatians about, I hope the knife slips. He's not advocating for I hope that you actually cut your balls off. He's not really saying, but he's upset. He's passionate. And just like when you put like a message in a chat that maybe it could be taken out of context if the wrong person saw it,
But even in that kind of rage, he still says even in that very pointed text, he says, wives, submit to your husbands, but it's on the condition that your husband submits himself to God.
Yeah.
So in other words, this is the opposite of saying husbands can demand ridiculous things from their wives.
Right.
It's saying husbands can demand that their wives love God like they love God.
Yeah, that's it. That's where it begins and that's where it ends.
And actually, and you can't use any tactics that God would not use on you.
Yeah.
So you don't want God to condemn you, throw you into a pit of hell, abuse you. You can't do that to your wife. Full stop.
Nor is God controlling. So, I mean, it's pure freedom.
Perfect freedom,
which would be exactly what's being said here. See, you have to understand the context of the theology to understand it at all. That's the danger of just reading this at face value with a very limited understanding and thinking that you got it. You don't get it. You don't understand it at all.
Postmodern ideas.
Yeah.
That are basically shit.
Shit is don't be sorry. It's true. It is shit. It is pure shit. And we don't have sponsors on this show for this reason, because I want to tell it like it is. And if the word shit is what matters, then that's what we're going to say. So I'm not going to let some sponsor say we can't do that.
So you have bad interpretations of scripture, and it leads to these offshoots, and now you have these.
And I will go ahead and add before we go on to break.
They leave authority. That's what happens.
Yes.
The reason I brought this one up in particular is I personally, a job that I had, I was speaking with another person that although he said that they were as diehard Republican as they come, if a woman were to be elected for president, he would not vote for them because the Bible says a woman should have no authority over a man.
That's pure garbage.
An agenda.
Just misled.
Yes.
Don't tell that to Margaret Thatcher, Father.
Our Lady of Grantham, we love Mrs. Thatcher. We love Mrs. Thatcher.
All right, we'll be back after this. Don't go away.
you are my lucky charm. I hold you close in the night in my arms. And when we open our eyes, my worries fade away. 'Cause you gave me your heart in the light of day, in the light of day. And when we open our eyes, my worries fade away. 'Cause you gave me your heart in the light of day, in the light of day. Sweet delight, you are my lucky charm. I hold you close in the night in my arms. And when we open our eyes, my worries fade away. 'Cause you gave me your heart I'm a lucky charm. I hold you close in the night in my arms. And when we open our eyes, my worries fade away. 'Cause you gave me your heart in the light of day, the light of day. Sweet delight, you are my lucky charm. I hold you close in the night in my arms. And when we open our eyes, my worries fade away. 'Cause you gave me your heart in the light of day.
Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final hour of Vestiges After Dark, Theological Misconceptions, and we've been clearing up quite a few of them, but we can start taking some of your questions if you have some. We're going to continue with what Brandon has collected. I mean, we have more here than I think we can get through in the next hour, but I want to save some time for you to ask questions, too. If you want to call into the show, that would be the best way to get your question heard and answered. And our new number is 802-321-0073. That's 802-321-0073. There's no queue number or anything else. You just dial that number and it will connect you in, and we'll bring you on the air with whatever is on your mind. When we come back here, more theological misconceptions that Brandon will share, and Father Chris and Jamie will do our best to answer. Hopefully we're not being too condescending tonight. You guys let us know. Don't go away. April in our chat has a good point. Not all Protestant churches are like what Brandon grew up with. That is very true, and I would say that not all denominations are the same in different in all throughout the world. There's a lot of variation. Okay, in Protestantism, that's some of the unfortunate parts of schism. That when you branch off and you start doing your own thing, then you start to get local deviations. Like Jamie was telling me during the break that when she went to Sunday school, she was actually taught by a mainstream Protestant church that Jesus and God were not the same person, that Jesus was his son, but not the same person.
It was the way they taught it in Sunday school. They may have meant to teach us that they were one and the same, but the way they presented it was that they were actually two separate.
I mean, that's like pure heresy. That's like one of the oldest heresies in the book.
Yeah, it wasn't until high school that we, during confirmation, where it got sewed back up.
I mean, that's like the first heresy.
I remember being little and thinking that. Yeah. So very poor teaching.
Jesus has two natures, human and divine, but only one person, divine.
And see, that's the thing that we need to always remember here. Look, we're not trying to criticize Protestants, but what I am trying to say is you need to, if you are a Protestant and you're happy to stay that way, which is perfectly fine, you need to challenge, though, this kind of stuff, at least within yourself. I'm not saying go march into your church and create a ruckus. I'm just saying make sure that you educate yourself. And the best way to do that is to go right to the horse's mouth, okay? The Bible can be confusing, so that's not necessarily enough. You're going to need to read what the early Christians thought about it, because that's where the rest of the context comes from. And that's why it's so important to read the fathers of the church. And once you do that, it'll make so much more sense to you. I can't even emphasize that enough. Don't take your pastor's word for it. Chances are he's not as educated as he wants you to think he is in theology. Go and you're going to have to take the reins, and you're going to have to, do this yourself. You're going to have to be self-directed in it, because you can't take what these churches are teaching for face value. You have to go and validate yourself. The best way to do that is to hear it from the horse's mouth. Go listen to the fathers of the church. Read what they said about it. That's going to be your best bet, okay? Because they were the closest to, the people that wrote it. All right, Brandon, what's our next one here?
So I want to get to at least two more, since this is the final hour.
Yeah, I think we can do that.
This next one, also personally speaking, and I had to get clarification from my older brother, but we were taught in the last church I was at, and this is one of the reasons why I left the church, was we were taught that gays are going to hell. The pastor would preach on that, and a couple of members in the congregation would say, "Amen." So kind of want to fix that.
Yeah, let's fix that one right now. I think that's an important one to fix. Okay, so let's be very clear on this one. Okay, the church has no authority to declare anyone in hell. None at all. That's exactly what Matthew chapter 7 is teaching against. Okay, that is called judgment. You don't have the right of judgment. And that is, you can't even argue that it's discernment, because you cannot ever decide just on the basis of what you think the Bible says, or what you think something in the Bible means. You cannot decide for another person their fate, the fate of their soul. You have no authority here. So, in the words of St. Paul, you need to keep your mouth shut. Women or male, doesn't matter in this case, because this is ridiculous to be teaching things like this. Now, the important thing here, and I guess this comes back to, again, something we've talked a lot on this show about, okay, is this is Leviticus. All right, this is coming from Leviticus, and that is the abomination of sodomy and sex, men having sex with other men. Interestingly, it doesn't really talk about females having sex with other females, but it does talk about men having sex.
To borrow a phrase from Queen Victoria, when lesbianism was mentioned, she looked confused and said, "What do they do?"
They find things to do. But I mean, the reality is, men, there is a prohibition in the scriptures about that. What is not fully understood is why. Okay, is this just God being a prude? Is this just the ancient Jews being prudish? Is there not some kind of fundamental reason here? Well, again, it comes back to some of the things that we don't, as human beings, like to talk about. So we're going to have to talk about some of this. And some of that is the sacramental theology behind the sacrament of matrimony, because that's going to give us a lot of the answers here. So one of the issues is, why is there a challenging relationship between homosexuality and Christianity? Where does this come from and why does it exist? Well, it exists in the fact that unlike the world, unlike your country or your politicians or law or whatever, which can strive to be egalitarian, even if you disagree with it, you can strive for a type of fundamental equality for the sake of liberty itself. The church doesn't have that same kind of flexibility, because there is a certain standard of operations that exists that comes back to what God intended for his creation, which is what the Christian is striving to achieve. That's how the Christian works to move away from sin, is by coming into the mind of God and operating as God would to the best of that human being's ability, which, albeit it's not going to be very good, but it's going to be better than doing nothing. So when it comes to something like having sexual relations, that exists not for pleasure, but for completing one of the first command of God, really, is be fruitful and multiply. And so it's about reproduction. That doesn't mean it's not meant to not be enjoyed, but it's be enjoyed within the context of what that is. Two people of the same sex having sexual relations cannot produce offspring, which by virtue of what that is means that even if they have the best of intentions, even if they, were to live the Christian life in every other way perfectly, they can never receive the sacrament of matrimony, which means that they will always fall back into the sin of fornication. By default, they have to, but it's no different than the fornication that a man and woman have when they do it without the benefit of the sacrament as well. So we don't need to see this as a separate thing. In my view on this, I don't see there being any separate thing, because it's really not. It's really not about some kind of strange, trying to control people, or however anybody wants to spin this issue. It really comes back down to just fundamentally, sex is about reproduction. And if you exclude the most important part of the reason this thing exists, well, then you're not following God's will. So that's where the issue comes from. Yeah, now, but does this come back to, hold on just a second, because I want to finish this thought. But does this come back down to where this being a consequence of going to hell? Well, fornication is mortal sin, but it's mortal sin for heterosexuals as well. So it's not like it's something that's being excluded for just the gay community. This is a problem on any fundamental level. But even when the church says that mortal sin separates you from God, puts you at risk for hell, does not say it sends you there. It simply says that this is this is a separation from God. You need to work to resolve. So nobody can say that someone goes to hell for something like this, because there's always matters of culpability. There's other factors involved. There is, I think, some general truth to the fact that genuine homosexuals didn't pick this lifestyle. This is not something they wanted for themselves. I don't think anybody would want to have to live life harder. But this is their interest. This is what they're attracted to. How can they control that? I couldn't be attracted to a male any more than a homosexual man could be attracted to a female in that same way. I couldn't conceive of being sexually attracted to a male. I can't conceive of that. So to tell a homosexual that you need to find a way because God says so, would be as unthinkable and impossible, really, because it would be impossible for me to find men attractive. I couldn't. I'm a heterosexual through and through. I can't help it. This is the way I am. All right. Right. Yeah. So it's just, and it just so happens I happen to fall on the good side of the stick here. But I feel for those that don't, because the church is for them too, and Christianity is for them too. And when you have churches like this teaching that you're going to hell for it, and people saying amen to that, no, that's going to send you to hell. Let me tell you, that's going to put you a lot closer to hell, doing things, preaching that message with people responding amen to it. Let me tell you, your soul is far more at risk for hell than any gay person I know. And I'm going to take that as a fact. And if I want to say that as an irrefutable fact, I will, because I really truly think that that's exactly what Jesus is saying in Matthew chapter 7. You're putting yourself in great spiritual risk for that. So if you're worried about people going to hell, start looking at yourself when you start saying stuff like that.
How many people have committed suicide because they were different, because they loved differently?
And when that happens,
when they went to the church for advice, they were rejected.
And when that happens,
so that makes those people culpable.
Absolutely. You have committed murder. Maybe not first degree.
I mean, let's get down to some basics on it. You can say a true thing for an evil reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Human beings are capable of doing that, right? So you could say a true thing like fornication. Let's just say fornication, but homosexual acts are one of the preconditions for mortal sin, which can lead you to hell.
Right.
That is a true thing to say. But if you're saying that in order to vilify and other a person within your community, then you're using a true statement in an evil way. And so now this is where, I mean, the rad trads have attacked Pope Francis. It's ironic. I'm going to
bring this up because the Pope had a little issue with this. What was it yesterday?
So I think this is a good place to bring it up because he's been accused of being too soft on homosexuals, right?
Right.
Because who am I to judge all of that on the plane?
Right.
And again, that has been misinterpreted. What he's doing is he's trying to avoid what I just described, using Christian truths as in an irresponsible and immoral way to essentially, he doesn't want homosexual people to be lost. So he's trying to say, look, I'm not here to judge your inclinations and the cross that you bear, and all are welcome in the church. That is a true statement, right? That's a true statement used for good. Now, then people say, well, why on earth did he use the F word to refuse to the F word about homosexuality,
right,
when referring to, should we have gay men in the seminaries? Now, to answer that question, you've got to remember that he's from Argentina. And so he's riddled with this sort of latent Marxism that says you always have to stick up for the oppressed. So when he's speaking to the world, he sees homosexual people as oppressed, like they are. I mean, they're thrown off buildings in Islamic countries, let's
not forget that.
Them in England.
I have a comment on that when you get done.
So he's sticking up for the oppressed when he's saying, I'm not going to be judging homosexuals. He's basically saying, we want to love people to the kingdom of heaven, right? That's what he's saying. That's the better focus, right? Let's focus on heaven and what gets us there. So, but why then does he use this word about homosexuals in seminaries becoming priests? Is because he sees the gay lobby within the priesthood as, and it's
very, very strong in this country, at least. I don't know. I can't speak for the rest of the world.
And he sees them as being the oppressor within the church.
Yes, he does.
Because they're the ones that are pushing against his agenda, because they're like the rad trads and all the rest of it. So it's at the same time, it's got nothing to, when it comes to the Pope in particular, this particular Pope, it's actually, homosexuality is not the issue. His issue is oppressed versus oppressor. And he sees homosexuals in the world as oppressed, and he sees homosexuals within the clergy as the oppressor. So that explains it. I mean, it doesn't pardon it, by the way, but it does explain it. So for me, the approach is to say all things that are mortal sins put you at risk of going to hell. And do you know what? It's very easy. It would be really easy for me, because like you, I'm a heterosexual. It'd be really easy for me to focus on homosexuals as the sort of poster boys and girls for being in sin and doing the wrong thing. But we know that's also true of people who bear false witness. That's all, which means lying. That is also true of people that aren't present at the sacrifice of the Mass on a Sunday for anything other than a grave reason. We make it, when it comes to mortal sin, if we're going to look at it in a very Catholic understanding, we make no distinction between those sins. So why is it that homosexuality is the one that is being thrown in people's face?
Because it's politically motivated in that sense. It's that's what ideologically motivated. Yep. So let me mention this. Okay, so 2 points that you brought up. Okay, the Pope Francis recognizing that there is a very strong homosexual culture in the seminary that has become a bit oppressive to those who are not. I can testify to this. I'm not afraid to even say this, but I'm going to share something that I've really never talked about publicly before. But I've never really mentioned in any detail why I left Roman Catholic Seminary all those years ago. Because if I hadn't done that, I probably would be an unmarried Roman Catholic priest to this day. So I guess I got saved from it. And this might have been a good thing that this happened because I enjoy my life now, and I'm not sure I would have enjoyed it if it had gone that way, considering what the world ended up turning into. I think I'm in a much better place now, considering what the world's like today. So I don't think I'd want to be a Roman Catholic priest in this world. I'd much rather be the Nicolaitans bishop than I am. But anyway, when I was in seminary, I was in my first or second week, I think, and trying my best to make this work because I'm a very seclusive kind of person, and living in a community like that is difficult for me. I mean, that was a real sacrifice, a real challenge, and I was struggling with that on its own. But the one thing I didn't need was somebody coming up to me and inviting me to a masturbation party. And that's exactly what happened. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Yeah, we can laugh at it now. It wasn't too funny at the time. But yes, this is and the doors. This is the real thing. The doors to the various dormitory rooms, when they were closed, they had this little contraption where you could see into the room but not out of the room. So that the priests that run the seminary could look inside the rooms to make sure you weren't doing anything with your roommate. And that was the actual reason why I was actually told that by clergy, why that was that way. This is how bad it was. This is how prolific it was. And I thought, I did not join the seminary to become part of an orgy. This is not my motivation. I'm getting the fuck out of here. And I think I said it just like that. And I walked the hell out of there, and they said, well, you walk out of here, you'll never be a priest. It's like, well, watch me. You don't get to decide that. God decides that. You're not God. And look at what ended up happening. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is that really did happen. So I'm not going to make excuses for the Pope. I don't know. I can't say whether or not he should know whether or not to use that word. But the fact of the matter is, I can understand why he would be excited about it, in the sense that this needs to be addressed, because it is a problem. It is a problem. Now, to the other point, the
Lavender Mafia.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about the LGBTQ political identity, because I don't see these as people. Okay. I see LGBTQ as a political agenda. All right. I separate that from the people that claim that the LGBTQ claims it's about. It's not about them. It's not about gay people. It's not about lesbians and
a person is not a community.
Right.
A person is not a community.
Exactly. So the LGBTQ, is really all up in arms about the Palestinian conflict with, and all right. So I find it rather ignorant and hypocritical, but let's just get this out. Okay. That they're talking, this pro-Palestinian speech. Now, I'm not saying, look, I don't like what's going on out there from either side. So you're not going to get any support from me on either side, okay? But the one thing I am not going to accept is the LGBTQ IA plus whatever, okay, as a politically motivated agenda, pushing now this Palestinian agenda when the Muslim religion would have nothing better to do than to throw you off a building or hang you from some freaking tree somewhere. They would burn you alive. They would skin you for fun. And you're going to support that just because you don't really even know what's going on out there?
There's only one country in the Middle East where gay people can get married.
Yeah. And but yet they will come after Christianity left and right. And there is literally, now I'm not talking to what Brandon's talking about here, but I'm going to say, at least as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, whether you be Roman Catholic or Nicolaitanian Catholic, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody more accommodating and more understanding of people in this particular context than those two, than this church or that, or the Roman Catholic Church in general. You'll be hard pressed to find anyone. And yet we are constantly being attacked by them. We're being called homophobes. I don't even know what the hell that means because I'm not afraid of anybody. Okay. So you find a new word because phobia is not the right word. Okay. But even if you're going to use it in the context that you mean it, which I understand how you mean it, I've never known a genuine Roman Catholic that felt that way. You're not going to find a Nicolaitanian Catholic that feels that way. The fact is, though, that you're just politically motivated, and the Palestinian conflict proves it. Because
they're just anti-West. All of this is just anti-West, which is anti-Christian.
It is. It's exactly what it is.
It's all anti-Christianity.
And you're falling hook, line, and sinker. So if I can do anything for the gay community, or the alternative lifestyle community, which is how I'd rather refer to it as, because I hate political identities, and LGBTQI plus is political, so I have no respect for that. Okay, no. You've already pulled your pants down. Okay, you got caught with your pants down this time, because the fact that you support Palestine when they would love nothing more than to destroy you, okay, proves to me that you're all political and you're just going to do with whatever the liberal agenda tells you to do. Okay. I don't mean to get off on that tangent, but I had to say it because it is relevant here. And this is actually what is at the heart of what Brandon's talking about, because the other side of the coin is the conservative agenda, which is just as strong and just as dirty as the liberal one. And what this
ideologically motivated.
It is, exactly. It's the same thing. So when you say all gays are going to hell, amen, you're just spewing forth your conservative bullshit agenda, and you're politically motivated, and none of that has anything to do with God.
Also, I don't want anyone to go to hell.
Nobody should. Why would you ever say amen to that?
But you see, again, I think part of the way that you can separate out the political from the spiritual, and I think Christians do this really badly across the board, is see, America, your constitution, right? Your constitution is freedom from, basically. Mm-hmm. So there's freedom from and there's freedom for. Freedom from, your constitution says the government can't do this to you, can't do that to you, can't do that, right? There's limits to what the government can do. They can't restrict your speech. They can't restrict your religious freedom, okay? They're all freedom from.
Right.
But the church, or Christ, stands for freedom for. So the government should not tell you what you can and can't say. Your Christian faith tells you there are things you shouldn't say and there are things you should say. Mm-hmm. Okay. And basically, like, the pure form of that works. So you don't want a situation where a government politically can be tyrannical in controlling what you say, think, or do. but the Christian faith does do that, but it doesn't. The difference is it doesn't do it by force of arms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's what, and people confuse these things all the time.
Yeah.
And it's why I would not want to live in a Christian theocracy.
No,
that would not be a good.
Oh, that'd be hell. That would be true hell. Look at what happened when we had one. It was pure. I mean, look, it worked for a time when you could integrate feudalism, which I think integrated well with how the Christian theocracy of Rome operated. But I mean, all of the problems that came out of that is I mean, I don't think the Crusades were half as bad as people make them out to be, because I really think that we'd all be speaking Arab today, worshiping, some weird
false god,
concept of God through through the Quran, if we hadn't had those Crusades. Thank God for them. But the Spanish Inquisition was a truly horrendous thing. That was truly horrendous. And there are Catholics today that would love to bring that back if they could. Catholic Answers, I'm sure, is one of them. I wouldn't doubt that for a minute. But they wouldn't be going after the gay people. They're going after me. I mean, they they go after people like me. No, theocracy would not be the good thing. And that's why look, I have nothing against Muslims. I want to make that clear. I have everything against theocracy. And Islam is not a religion. It's a political party. I'm sorry. It's a political party.
To Islam. I love Muslims.
Yep. That's it.
I'm opposed to Islam.
Yep.
I love Muslims.
And I'm opposed to Islam, not because it's a religion, but because it's not a religion. It pretends to be a religion. It is a political party. That's it. That's the only reason why I feel that way. Shoot me. I'm sure,
So I will go ahead and switch gears.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to get to this topic, because this topic is really what brought me asking you if we could do this episode.
All right. Yeah, let's do it then. Sure.
And it's actually non-religious, so that's kind of interesting.
Okay.
Tarot and astrology being demonic or being tools of the devil.
Okay, so the misconception is that they're tools of the devil, because that is not a really accurate statement. Are penises the tool of the devil? Because, you could use a penis in a bad way. You could rape someone with it. Does that mean penises are evil? Or, I mean, does that mean vaginas are evil too? Because, they entice these men to rape these women? That's ridiculous thinking. But that's exactly what a person is saying when they say tarot and astrology are the tools of the devil, because they can be used the wrong way. I mean, so that's in the argument of saying that we need to ban all guns because guns kill people.
I was going to say, a gun's evil.
Yeah, gun's evil. Yeah, no, you can use them the wrong way.
Substance.
Right. So no, anything's a tool of the devil. Your body's a tool of the devil. Your mind is a tool of the devil. I mean, I would be more worried about those things than a tarot deck, because those things actually are what create the harm. Right? It's minds. It's evil minds that do evil things. It's not decks of cards have never gotten up and walked around and hurt people. So that's a stupid statement when people say this. Okay, and I've heard it myself. So you're not the only one that's heard that. So that's the misconception. The issue is where does it fall into Christian theology? Well, Christian theology has no place for it, because the problem with tarot cards and astrology is that they very quickly, because people are foolish like this, dare I say stupid like this, they make it deterministic. And when you make something deterministic, you take everything away from God and put it into the form of a superstition. Astrology and tarot are not evil or wrong in and of themselves. What they are is they put you at risk for seeing them deterministically, which would mean that now you deprive yourself of the free will that God sacredly gave you. That's sacred. That's a sacred relationship.
You're rejecting a gift from God.
Exactly. So that you're making choices now based upon something that is meant to happen. It's destined to happen. And now there's no way around it. But if you understand astrology or tarot or any kind of divination in the true context, more along the lines of how how it's appropriately utilized, which of course the church doesn't have any framework for this.
A lot of these people, I've been around them who would say the things that Brandon's just said. They're also businessmen that do the Myers-Briggs personality types in their workforce.
Yeah, so what's that,
Yes.
Can't they see that they're the same thing?
It is the same thing. We have to also remember that in the Old Testament, okay, in Samuel, there was the Urim and the Thummim, okay? These were divinatory tools. But the reason that they are not considered to be evil is, first of all, only certain people could use it. It's basically a high priest, right? He had a relationship with God. Okay, so there was a proper training, which I would say all divination requires exceptional proper training. You should not just go to your Barnes & Noble and pick up a deck of tarot cards or order on Amazon and just start having fun. I think that's absolutely stupid and foolish. And the church would be right to condemn that. So there was training, but most importantly, Urim and Thummim it was a direct communication with God. So it was understood that what was being received in this context was done with the intent to get God's will, or at least get some insight into God's will. Tarot and astrology can be used in exactly that same way by properly trained individuals. Now, the church isn't going to say this because, number one, the church isn't in the business of training you to use tarot cards. They're not going to do that.
No.
The church is here to help you gain salvation. That's going to be so superfluous to teach people things like divination, because that's just going to get in the way. And it's going to lead most people to just start seeing it superstitiously and deterministically. And that's not something the church is going to want to get involved in. So it is going to say that we should avoid these things. Rightfully so. They should be avoided, because the natural tendency of human beings is to go in that direction, that superstitious direction. But is this any different than saying that the 666 is a evil number? And like you were saying in the chat earlier, I don't think it made it to the air, but I'll mention it for those that are not able to see the chat. That a highway in Tennessee was changed from 666 to some other number. Yeah. That's superstition. Okay, that's the same superstition that's being condemned when the church teaches against tarot cards and astrology. So the sin here is not using tarot cards and astrology. The sin here is superstition and seeing things deterministically, taking away the relationship with God and God's freedom to act in your life and your freedom to make your own choice. That's the sin. Okay, so if you can learn how to use them as psychological tools, to give better insight into your motives or your understanding of reality, but not in a deterministic way, but in a what is the available opportunities to me kind of way, then there's no sin there. Furthermore, I want to also add that divination is almost always linked to the same words that are used for necromancy. Okay, so in the ancient world, seeing the future using divination you didn't have nice clean tarot cards to go by, which, by the way, came from the church, right? The original ones had pictures of Jesus's life. They used to use them as teaching tools for those who couldn't read, just so you know. Okay, it was almost like icons on cards. They were made by Christians. All right, but aside from that, we didn't have those nice cards back in ancient Jewish times.
That doesn't help, because they think that Roman Catholics were all evil.
I know they do think they were all evil. They do.
Confirmed it for them.
Well, but there was there wasn't Protestants yet, so they have to accept the fact that that was the church. But the reality is, though, it was also there was no other form of divination that was typical except for the conjuring spirits to communicate with them. And conjuring was not being done in sort of like talking to spirits that might be around sort of way. It was literally bringing them back from Sheol to communicate with you. That was the ultimate abomination. Okay, so when Scripture talks harshly about these kinds of things, it's not because they're tools of the devil. It's because there are certain practices here that are very much against God's will And there's risk for people continuing to move further away from God's will when it's used incorrectly. And because the church doesn't have any reason to teach anybody how to do it correctly, it's just going to say, you don't need these things in your life. And you know what? You really don't. You really don't. They're only used, their value is really only in a very limited way, in a very limited context. And honestly, if I didn't have a Buddhist background, I probably wouldn't have any interest in it whatsoever. It's only my Buddhism is where that, finds value, because Buddhists don't see it deterministically either, by the way. Some use it deterministically and superstitiously, and that's problematic too, even from a Buddhist perspective. So I don't know, Father, anything else you can add to that one?
No, I mean, other than to say that actually by misunderstanding these things, often they might not do tarot cards, but there's other things that they do in their life that they treat deterministically.
Yeah.
And
that's the sin.
So just be careful.
That's the sin. We can't you don't find scapegoats for the devil. You don't find scapegoats for the sin either. All right. You're always complicit, and you got to know how you're complicit.
The good news is, by the way, and this is like a major difference between the sorts of condemnations that you're describing, Brandon, and the caution that we're giving. The good news on our side of the ledger is, if you think you might be at risk or you've done something wrong, we have the sacrament of reconciliation. Mm-hmm. All you got to do is come on your knees and faithfully confess to God in the presence of a priest, and you'll get that absolution. So we're not saying, oh, if you fall off that ledge, you're down. That's it. You're done. Mm-hmm. We don't believe that, and Jesus doesn't will that. So and this is the really hard truth for people to accept, is that murderers can be forgiven and go to heaven.
Mm. Yeah, they don't like that.
Now, I understand when friends of mine who like Christianity, they go, that teaching's too hard for me. I understand it.
Yeah.
But it's true.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look, they don't understand that reconciliation isn't about forgiveness. We use that word, but that's not really what's happening in reconciliation. Reconciliation is not about forgiveness. Reconciliation is about it's about the complete blotting out of the sin as if it never happened. It makes it as though it never occurred. And that's the only one can be made perfect. You can't look, think about it from even just a kindergarten level of understanding, of intellect. You go to the kingdom of heaven, it's going to be perfect there, right? Everyone kind of understands that. Anyone that knows anything about heaven has at least that basic understanding. How could it be perfect if you took with you memories of all the things you did wrong and the guilt that comes with that? And now being in heaven with a more perfect understanding, a more perfect intellect, now really realizing your consequences. How could it be perfect if you continued to have to live with the consequences of knowing those things existed? The only way heaven can be perfect is if those things are removed as though they never even occurred. And that's what it's doing. Now we have to catch up to that grace, as I said last week, and I'm not going to rehash what I said last week. Go back and listen to last week's show if you want to hear the rest of this comment. But that's how it works, and that's the part that people also have a hard time understanding. So when you talk about murderers being forgiven in reconciliation, receiving reconciliation, going to heaven, well, they're not murderers anymore. They've been made perfect and whole. They're completely new people. It's not the murderer that goes to heaven. It's the perfected individual that goes to heaven. And that murderer doesn't exist anymore. And that's how you have to see it. And that's how we have to see it with our own sins, even if we're not murderers. And hopefully we're not. But, even
because that's the other peril, isn't it? Because if we think that, there are certain people that are beyond forgiveness and couldn't possibly receive that grace.
Yes.
Then we're actually, that's prideful boasting on our part. What we're saying is, of course we're not as bad as them.
Sure.
And actually, I don't hold with that. I think, I'm a sinner. I am not better than any other human being who's ever lived. But I'm amazingly perfectly loved by God, just as every human being that's been created is.
Yep. Even Adolf Hitler. And I know that would be a hard one for
Adolf
people, but
Hitler.
we can't even say he's in hell.
We can't.
Yeah, we can't.
It's likely, given what we know.
But we don't. But we
don't know.
can't know.
But we don't
We
know.
can't know. We don't, and we don't really know what occurs in the dying process. When does the opportunity for salvation actually get cut off? We just say, well, it's at death, but we don't know at what point in death. When the process is finished,
death is a process.
it's a process. So we're in the process of Hitler dying. I'm not advocating for Hitler, but we're in the process of Hitler dying. Was his opportunity for salvation cut off? And did he not do anything about it? Was there not one last minute opportunity? I think the grace of God would say there is for all of us. And that needs to mean, that needs to say that the worst of us, Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler, Judas Iscariot, all have perhaps an opportunity to have been perfected. And that's good hope for us too, because if something that horrible could be perfected, then hopefully those of us who are not quite that bad, could maybe have a chance too. You know what I mean? So it's actually a very hopeful message. We shouldn't be upset about that at all. Brandon, we probably could do one more really fast.
All right. One more.
I'm actually going to take the phone number down because if we're going to do one more, I don't think we could take a call, but go ahead and do that.
This is probably a really quick one anyways. Works is not required for a Christian to enter into heaven. All we need is faith.
Oh my goodness.
I get into discussions with a lot of my friends about this.
So well, let me ask you this first. Now I know Father's going to have an answer for this, and I do. You do too.
Nah.
I want to ask this, okay, to a person that would say that, okay, sola fide, right? Faith alone. So then, how is salvation achieved? Is it automatic for everybody? Does everybody just automatically go? So, I mean, or, does that mean that in this person's mind, does that mean that the Dalai Lama gets to go too? But he doesn't believe in Jesus, but doesn't believing in Jesus, isn't that a work too? Doesn't believing in Jesus require something of yourself? I mean, it's not just saying that I believe Jesus existed. You have to do something with that faith, right? So, I mean, where in the scriptures did Jesus ever say, just believe in me, I'll take care of everything, and you're all set? Everything Jesus ever says is followed up by some action that is required. He says, this is what you got to do, and this is how you do it. In fact, he doesn't even really talk much about faith and belief. What he really talks about is action, what you have to do with it.
Love.
Yeah.
Love is a work.
Yeah, that is a work too. Father, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I was going to say, how did they receive their faith in Jesus Christ? Someone told them.
Yeah, that's a work as well.
Is that not a work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the work, it's the work. But I just think this faith and works thing is such a straw man argument. I've had so many arguments with other clergymen about this. How on earth do you separate them out? How on earth can you separate
They're
out
not.
faith
They're,
and works?
it's like saying that. It's like saying here. It literally is the thing itself. It's the thing itself. Okay, so no more than you could have a coin that doesn't have two sides. You couldn't have a coin that's just one side, one-dimensional coin. That can't exist. You have to have. If you have one side, then there's going to be another side.
Passed on, nourished.
Yes.
Yes. Nourished, developed, shared. All of those things involve doing something.
Yes.
I think I've said before on the show, because I came to faith in a Baptist church, and thank God for them, by the way. Thank God for them because they brought me to faith.
Yeah.
But it made me laugh because they were very much works don't save you. But before I got baptized, that you have this interview and they say, and what is the creed's never mentioned, of course, but do you, what? But you have to say, and what is your confession? And the answer is Jesus is Lord. And you say that, and then you're baptized. And they're very much saying that they're saying baptism isn't a sacrament, really. They're saying, your faith comes first, then we baptize you. But I reflected on this years later, and I said, so in order to get baptized, I had to say to the congregation, Jesus is Lord. That's a work.
That's a work. What about the gay people, the people that were saying that the gays go to hell? I bet you they're the ones that are saying that if their faith alone. So how can you say that they're going to hell then? Because if it's faith alone, then all these gay people have to do is believe in Jesus. Then they can do whatever they want. They can have sex with whoever they want. It won't matter. Yeah. So how can you say that? I mean, because
it's such garbage.
It is such garbage, and it has no basis. And you know how many gay people believe in Jesus? A lot. A really large number. They just don't feel welcome in the church, which is the real atrocity here. You know what? You're going to have to account for that. You people out there that make them uncomfortable, you're going to have to account for that.
I think, they wouldn't feel welcome in that church, that's for sure.
Well,
but I think, I'm finishing a biography about a man.
It's very hard for them, Father, though, if they're in a relationship. If they're in a relationship, how do two gay men in a relationship go to church and feel welcome? How?
I think you're right. They couldn't go to a Bible Belt church in the South and feel welcome. But actually, and I'm going back to the 1950s and 60s, at least two men who I've spoken. This is I know this is like specific, so anecdotal, but the church was their haven, but it was an Anglo-Catholic church. So maybe that there are certain spaces within the life of the church where people feel more welcome than others.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's all you can do. And that's what I do. It's like, look, I don't care if you're in a relationship. I don't care if you're actively in a relationship. Okay. I don't care who you have sex with. I don't care what your motivations are, how you see yourself, what your identity is. I am here to service you as a minister in whatever capacity I can, to the best that I'm able to. That means I might not be able to grant,
and however much you'll let me.
And how much you'll let me, but also as much as the church lets me too, because it's like there are limits. I can't grant matrimony. I can't give you that sacrament, but I can still give you grace. I can still bless you. I can do things and not judge you. All right. And that's the best that any church can do in this, because it's a very difficult, complicated situation, but it's not complicated for the reasons people think. I don't know. We're pretty much, unfortunately, though, at the end of the show. So
I do have one more thing to say to wrap up the last one.
Go for it.
James chapter 2, verses 14 through 17. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothing and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace and be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead.
Problem is, Brandon, is that Protestants have conveniently avoided the Epistle of St. James for many, many, many years because they don't like any of that you just said.
That's what they call it.
Yep.
But what you said is absolutely correct.
It is absolutely correct. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Next week, we will have Tracy, my wife, joining us for Relationship Talk. It should be part 2. I know you guys have requested this, and she was surprised. I think she was like, what more are we going to say? Well, we're going to find out, right?
Figure it out.
So, Father Chris, thank you. Brandon, thank you. Jamie, thank you. And big thanks to all of you out there for listening to tonight's show and joining us for this Tuesday. Spend it together talking about theology. Next week, relationships. We'll see you then and out there in the ether. God bless everyone.
Thanks, everybody.